As you may know by now, I am a film student, and in film school, as I'm sure you can imagine, they teach us that everything is done for a reason. There is a reason the set designer decided to put that there or use this colour. There is a reason the costume designer made these choices. There is a reason the director used these shots and these angles. And most of all, there is a reason this video was edited in this way. Every decision that someone has to make to produce a film is important and considered to some degree, and the editor is one of the greatest examples of this. There are some shows with interesting editing, and in my opinion, most videos have interesting editing to some degree. But there are some that are unusual, I guess would be a good word. There's a saying we learned that you shouldn't notice the editing, at least in terms of fiction filmmaking. It should blend seamlessly into the narrative. And in most cases, even the one I'm discussing today, it does. But there are definitely videos that are edited in more subtle ways than others, and when it isn't subtle, more and more people notice the editing and its implications. One such show with incredibly unsubtle editing and incredibly large implications is exactly the subject of today's video. Korean shows aren't known for being subtly edited, but survival shows, and especially Mnet survival shows, take it to a whole other level. I started watching Girls Planet in 2024, almost 3 years after it originally aired, having never watched the original. As a follow-up for my Zero Base 1 episode, I wanted to discuss their survival show, Boys Planet, but to do that, I felt like I needed to do my research. I needed to understand what had changed from Season 1 to Season 2, and Season 1 being Girls Planet, I felt I needed to watch it. And so I did, with a very keen eye looking out for all of the editing shenanigans, production hints, and behind-the-scenes footage. In this episode, I'll discuss the storylines in the show and how the editing made us feel differently towards different contestants. I'll be going over what the show is, its outcome, legacy, and major controversies, discuss why I'm making this video, give an overview of my top 9 now that I've actually watched the show, and then get into my analysis. I'll be keeping my analysis brief since the show is so long, or at least as brief as I can be. My first reactions focused on how sound, image, and editing were used to create an effect, and how that affects our perception of the trainees, hence leading to them either getting a high rank or a low rank. It also includes some interesting thoughts I had while watching the show, some alternate scenarios, and a lot of snarky comments at OT8 Kepler fans. At the end, I'll discuss the major storylines in the show and their resolutions, and key takeaways for the show and future seasons. Girls Planet was a very interesting show, and I feel both touched by it and that it made me even more skeptical about these survival shows. This episode will be split in 2, so this one is, naturally, the first half. Also, there are 99 girls here, so although I'll do my best, I apologise in advance for any mispronunciation of anyone's names. Even though I apologised, I have to put another apology because for the entirety of the first part and most of the second part, I was pronouncing Chai Bing's name incorrectly. So I've tried to catch and fix all of them, but I apologise in advance for that if any have slipped through. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Hi everyone, this is just editing Casper. I have a few things to say. First of all, as I kind of expected, YouTube blocked all of my little segments. So, okay, you haven't gotten to the video yet, but in this video I planned to include a few little segments where I added commentary over a Girls Planet clip. So for instance, I pointed out where there was a dramatic zoom, a weird sound effect, where music played a big role, etc. And as I somewhat suspected, YouTube did block videos with those clips. So thankfully for me, I checked that before I'd actually put the effort into doing all of them. but it does mean that I had to cut them all out of this video, which is a big shame because I think that's a huge educational aspect of this episode, and I think it's like the most important thing that I did / said in this episode. So what I've done is there were several clips that I'd already edited before I realised that it would be blocked on YouTube. So I've put them all together in a compilation, and I'll link that compilation in the description. It'll just be a Google Doc link, and if you're interested, and I really recommend you watch it, just watch that little video. It'll probably only be like 3 minutes long, and it'll give you some insight into the kinds of things I'm talking about when I say, oh, the music did a lot of heavy lifting here, or oh, the editing made this team look really bad, the editing made this team look really good, etc. And I'll have to cut those segments from the main video, so if it seems a little bit disjointed at points, it's because I had to cut those segments. So, like I said, I really recommend you check out that short little video in the description. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, or if you'd like my feedback on a specific scene from the show, because I didn't discuss all of them. Yeah, like I say in the actual episode, I really encourage you to watch Girls Planet, or at least parts of it, back, and keep an eye on the wacky editing that Mnet is doing. Speaking of the wacky editing, I wanted to just jump in before the main part of this episode and add another little video for those who are interested in extra watching or extra reading. I want to have a dedicated section to just mention, even though I do say it later, to just mention how insanely malicious the editing of Girls Planet is. And this is the case for every single reality show ever. It's not just Girls Planet, it's not just K-pop survival shows, it's not just Korean reality shows in general, it's all of them. It's the nature of the reality show genre, but K-pop shows are particularly bad. There's no reality show I've ever heard of or seen that doesn't have incredibly malicious and manipulated editing for the pain of drama. I personally would really recommend watching this video I'll link in the description, which is about the heroes of cosplay. It includes a really interesting video. I'll put the timestamp for that section of the video on screen. At this timestamp in the Heroes of Cosplay deep dive video, a show member talks about how they manipulated the show, and especially her confessionals, and how she was fed lines. And I'd really like to say this before starting the episode, just so you're primed to think about it. Keep in mind that the editors and the showrunners are working together, and they have complete control over what they show, and they're also in a position of power over these trainees especially. The confessionals, the sections like J and L cuts where someone speaks over previous or later footage, all of that, it is so insanely manipulated, and they can cut together things from multiple time periods, they can cut stuff out of context, they can ask leading questions, they can, like this person said in Heroes of Cosplay, they can feed you lines, and we even saw that on Girls Planet when they told Yanning to insult Yujin when she didn't want to. So just keep in mind, in the future when you're watching survival shows especially, nothing is real. There's often a grain of truth to it. So for instance, I talk about Dayeon a lot. There is 100% truth to Dayeon's talent. She is talented, but the way this show manipulated her made her seem like a god, and she's just not. It also made her seem like an amazing leader, and she's just not. There's a reason she's not the leader of Kepler. It's because as much as they manipulated her leadership skills to make her look better over the show, she's not actually a brilliant leader. They just wanted to make her look good. And even though they made Yujin look bad as a leader, Yujin has better leadership skills, which is why she was the leader. This is just one example. You know that I I 100% believe that Dayeon should be in the group. And I've talked in the past about how horrible her OT8s are, but it's just the most salient example in this show of how confessionals, the structure of the show, and other things were manipulated to make someone look good, or in the case of Chai Bing, make them look worse in opposition to someone else. So to conclude, I'd really recommend that you give the deep dive for Heroes of Cosplay a watch, or at least watch the section with the interview of the contestant who talks about how manipulated it was. I think it's a really great example of the lengths to which these shows will go to manipulate people, which we will talk about in this episode. So with that said, I will stop this interruption and enjoy the rest of the episode. GP999, or Girls Planet 999, Girls Planet as I'll refer to it for most of this episode, was an Mnet K-pop survival show which aired from mid to late 2021. The show featured 99 trainees, 33 each from the regions of Japan, Korea and China, across 12 episodes. The goal of the show was to produce a global girl group, and its final result was the 9-member group Kepler, made up of trainees Chaehyun, Bahie, Yujin, Dayeon, Youngin, Yeso, Hikaru, Mashiro and Xiaoting, who debuted in January 2022. Girls Planet was the 5th season of Mnet's Korean survival show series, I guess? See, the original series had been produced, which had 4 seasons, producing the girl groups IOI and IZ*ONE and the boy groups 101 and X1. But after the 4th season, vote rigging surfaced, and the scandal that followed led to a hiatus for IZ*ONE and the disbandment of X1 only a few weeks after their debut, and a hiatus for the show. It came back after over 2 years in 2021 with a brand new coat of paint, the space and planet theme, and the promise of a global girl group. And of course, the promise to not rig things. Well, as this episode will show, they couldn't rig things, but that never stopped them from manipulating their audience instead, which I guess is its own form of riggery. Girls Planet had several controversies over its runtime. Many of them were to do with evil edits and the usual of reality shows, such as Yanning's first episode diss of Yujin and Chai Bing's elimination after evil editing. Other scandals faced the trainees themselves, such as that some of the Chinese trainees supported the CCP, that the show was mistreating Chinese trainees, and that some fans of Bahie's planned to buy huge quantities of cheap SIM cards to artificially boost her votes. I don't think that ever ended up happening. In the end, the debut group wasn't without its controversies either. I've made an entire episode discussing some of these controversies, episode 3, and in that episode I've outlined them as follows. First, that Xiaoting, who was consistently the first-ranked Chinese contestant and never out of the top 2 throughout the show, suddenly dropped to rank 9 in the finale. Second, that Dayeon made it into the group after she had been heavily angel-edited at the expense of Chinese trainees, and had had sections of the show entirely manipulated around her. Third, that not only did the lineup only have 3 international members out of 9 positions, but also that only one of these, Xiaoting, was a Chinese member. Many fans said, in my opinion rightfully, that Mnet couldn't really call this group a global group with only 1/3 international members and only 1 Chinese member. Finally, there is the controversy of Bahie's inclusion in the group, which, as episode 3 expressed, many people weren't happy about. In the end, their controversies and their poor management led to the downfall of both Girls Planet and Kepler. Keep in mind that when I say downfall, I don't mean they flopped or anything. They were and are both very successful, just not nearly as much as the previous seasons and groups. But they did have a good impact. Several trainees outside of Kepler later debuted and gained at least some level of success, and many friendships made on the show seem to continue to this day. The 9 members of Kepler themselves got to debut and make a name for themselves, and perhaps most importantly for Mnet themselves, the show was successful enough that they managed to reboot Produce. In early 2023, we saw the second season, Boys Planet, air. Boys Planet was massively popular and successful and has had an enduring impact on current K-pop culture, especially K-pop meme culture. The boy group who debuted from the show, Zero Base One, had a record-breaking debut and are still immensely popular and record-breaking. Sadly, far more so than Kepler probably ever will be. Zero Base One even heralded the beginning of a new generation in K-pop, showing the impact of them and their show on the group. The fact that so many trainees from Boys Planet were able to debut so soon after the show, and how many of these debuts attracted attention, shows how successful the show was. In the end, Girls Planet and Kepler may have been questionable at times, but they completed their purpose. They were the experimental season before Zero Base One, and they successfully revived the Mnet produce empire, showing that, despite the controversy, Mnet shows could indeed do well, and could produce popular groups. So with our understanding of the show now at least at base level, let's discuss why I even decided to make this episode, over 3 years after the show originally aired. Well, you see, I, like many people, really liked Boys Planet. And when I say really liked, I mean really liked, as much as you can like a survival show. Of course, I still have my many issues with the ethics behind the show, how many trainees are snubbed and more, but the show itself was edited in such a kooky way that I found it enjoyable to follow along. I was also, of course, a fan of many of the trainees and of the final group, Zero Base One. In fact, I was so much a fan of the show and the group that I made a whole episode about it. Several of my podcast episode ideas centered around the editing on Boys Planet and the culture around it, so I felt it was only fair that I rewatch the entire show and note interesting editing moments. But I knew that, to give my fullest analysis, I would need to consider how it differed from the first season, Girls Planet. This was important to me because the small differences between the seasons were, I believe, a key factor in the massive gap in success between the two seasons' shows and final groups, and even more importantly, in how they were received by both fans and the general public. And I couldn't really compare differences if I hadn't watched Girls Planet, could I? So I watched it. I had seen bits and pieces when it aired, and through following channels who themselves followed the show, I learnt several interesting things about its storylines and saw the public reaction at the time it aired, but I had never got into the nitty-gritty of the show. In the end, I got very nitty-gritty, much more so than I had intended, and ended up with almost 50,000 words of notes, which I obviously would not turn into a script, hence this abridged version, which actually wasn't that abridged. I think I learnt a lot by watching the show, and most of all, I gained an appreciation for many of the contestants I previously knew little about, like Bora, Dayeon, and others. In the end, I would like to watch every season of Produce to see how the series developed, but not now. For now, I'll just have to take guesses. They take a long time to watch. So here is my definitely not a love letter, but maybe something vaguely similar, to Girls Planet 999 and its interesting editing. Over the show, I, as everyone does, developed my own top 9. The only different thing is that, for better or worse, I didn't need to worry about whether my top 9 debuted or not, since, well, the show was already over. And in the end, my top 9, or my dream team, is, in rough order, Dayeon, Wonjae, Shana, Suyeon, Bora, Yujin, Youngin, Yanning, and Ruchi, with Dayeon as my one pick. I really liked her. However, since she left the show, I would probably be voting for Suyeon or Wonjae in the finals, which would definitely not have made a difference to the final result. Some interesting things about this lineup. It would have 4 Chinese trainees, 4 Koreans, and only 1 Japanese, Shana. I didn't realise while watching the show that I didn't care about the Japanese trainees much. Mind you, that could be because a lot of them were just invisible edited. This lineup also has 5 idols who have previously debuted, and would have a higher average age than Kepler. It also only has 2 Kepler members and includes none of the 3 original centres of the show, Xiaoting, Dayeon, and Hikaru. I imagine this group doing a lot of ballads and having a generally darker concept, although many of the members like Ruchi, Yanning, Suyeon, Yujin, Youngin, and Shanna are good at adapting to different concepts. So basically anything is on the table, as you saw in my Rewriting Kepler episode. I think they would be very good at adapting to a space concept we hoped Kepler would have, and they would definitely be good for Kepler's strange market. It's also a group that is generally entertaining, talented, has a well-rounded balance of vocals, rappers, and dancers, and would be far more global than the Kepler we ended up with. It would also include all of the Chinese trainees who made it to the finals other than Xiaoting, the centre. It would have a foreign centre no matter which of my top 3 made it. It's a solid and unproblematic group in my opinion, with one exception and one major problem: Ruchi. Ruchi had a scandal during Girls' Planet that she supposedly supports the CCP and their genocide of Uyghur Muslims. This caused a stir internationally and in Korea and Japan, both of which historically have conflicts with China. There were many people on the internet who said that had she made it into the group, Kepler would have literally been dead in the water and would have flopped from the beginning, since the Korean general public would apparently boycott them and the Chinese government restrictions on idol activities would limit their activities there. Additionally, I doubt that Japan would be happy with her, and they definitely wouldn't be happy with my 1J lineup, so both versions of Kepler would be less successful there. And to put the final nail in the coffin, many people around the world would possibly boycott them just for Ruchi. She might even be forced to leave the group to avoid poisoning it, but they would never be able to come back from something like that. Now, the information about Ruchi's scandal and her actions which led to it is pretty much non-existent on the English-speaking internet, so I can neither confirm nor deny it. There is also some skepticism about whether or not she would actually be boycotted, since many people rightfully pointed out that she still received large numbers of both Korean and international votes in the finale, so goodness knows how it actually would have turned out. Anyway, to avoid this, I decided that I would in fact replace Ruchi with Mashiro. This would give us a more even 4-3-2 ratio and would hopefully make the Korean audience less upset. Everyone loves Mashiro after all. I can't foresee any major concerns with this group. Yanning was evil edited, but I think she was pretty well redeemed, and she does have some smaller scandals, but they don't seem to have affected her much. No one else in the group was evil edited or had scandals, so they're a good combination. The other major concern is the fans, especially those of Yurina, Bahie, and the 3 centres, who were upset that their picks didn't make it in. But this happens with every single show, and I feel this would be a strong enough group to generally overcome these concerns. I also had some honourable mentions of other people I liked on the show but didn't fit my group of 9. Maya, Mei, Yurina, and Manami, as well as all of the members of Kepler, of course. These were people who I was sad to see eliminated, but obviously in any show like this we'll have way more talented trainees than we have spots in the group. So be prepared to see me talking about these people a lot. Also, what are these people up to these days? Well, I did see a video by Fromus9 which goes over everything we know about every single trainee on the show. We don't know much about what Maya is up to, and the same goes for Manami outside of a few show appearances. Or at least this was the case for Maya up until a few weeks ago at time of recording, when she debuted with Odd Youth. Odd Youth are pretty small and haven't had a ton of promotions yet, but I'm curious to see how they go, and of course I love to see Maya, now that she's actually not a child. Wonjae, Ruchi, and Yanning are active on social media, although Wonjae's group disbanded. Both Yanning and Ruchi are also working as soloists. Ziyin has also returned to solo activities and is active on social media. Bora and Mei returned to Cherry Bullet, who later sadly disbanded, and of course Yujin, Mashiro, and Youngin debuted in Kepler, with Mashiro leaving to join the, in my opinion, ill-fated group Maiden. Shanna debuted in Lapillus, and Suyeon joined Billy, who are actually coming to Australia next year, so I get to see Suyeon, finally! Yurina debuted as a soloist in Japan, so in the end all of my picks got to experience some kind of debut or idol life, which is heartwarming, even if the majority of them didn't gain great success. At this point in the script I initially said I would expect to see Maya soon, and I was right, we did in Odd Youth. With that little analysis of my top picks on the show, let's take a look at the episodes themselves, starting from, well, the beginning, of course. Episode 1 is, well, episode 1. The purpose of the episode on Mnet survival shows is to introduce the concept and general format of the show, introduce the judges and some of the contestants. Note I say some, not all. And to start the demo stages and grading of these stages. The demo stages are a key part of produce seasons since the beginning. Their purpose is to introduce and highlight contestants Mnet wants to, well, highlight, and to show both the incredible skill and incredible failure of the contestants. These stages are also graded, helping the audience have a rough understanding of how good these contestants were at their jobs. In the produce seasons, these grades ranged from A to F, and Boys Planet somewhat returned to this system, with the 0 to 4 star rating system, but Girls Planet was trying to distance itself from produce, both in concept and form, so it had a different system. The only endorsement a trainee could get other than, general praise from the judges, was to be awarded a top 9 sticker, showing that they were a candidate for the top 9 as voted by the judges. Interestingly and unsurprisingly, Boys Planet in this regard was far closer to the produce concept and structure than Girls Planet, probably because Mnet deemed that the controversy had died down enough after GP999 to return to their old format. This means, sadly, that Girls Planet is the ugly child of the produce franchise, and the one that had all of the very questionable experimental things going on. The format of trainees, enter, do demo stages, get graded, has existed since the first season of the show. Girls Planet, of course, made a change. Instead of being introduced through company groups, the girls were introduced through keywords, which connected 3 girls, one from each of the countries. But before we get to that, we need to go through the show's intro first. It is very dramatic, as expected from produce, but it also needs to distance itself from produce, so instead of emphasizing the brilliance of Korea, it emphasizes the new space concept and the idea of different languages bringing people together. I found it hilarious that the intro talked about how there was over 6,000 languages in the world, and then the show itself only included 3 languages, Korean, Japanese, and presumably Mandarin Chinese. Sure, these languages do represent a large portion of the world's population combined, but they don't represent so many languages, so many countries, and even tons of parts of Asia or even just East Asia. It's super restrictive, and it really bothered me that the languages were used to suggest unity and multiculturalism in the show, and in the end it only included 3 countries and consistently discriminated against foreign trainees. If anyone genuinely believes that the purpose of the show is to be multicultural, how did you come to that conclusion, people? Don't believe Mnet's obvious propaganda. They were clearly only trying to improve their reputation after the vote rigging scandal. I also noted during this section that the girls were grouped by language, not nationality, like I initially thought they were. Just a fun fact. But then again, I suppose it makes sense, since mixed-race contestants like Bahie were organised by their primary language, not nationality. Despite my complaints about Girls Planet, I do legitimately like the idea of the 3 girls connecting via a keyword. It's very cute, and it's a quick way to tell the audience about a tiny facet of a person's personality. The way it's edited is also very cute, with the angelic music, the cute outfit shots, and the shots of the girls walking through the spiral to the centre to connect. The overhead shots showing them getting closer and closer to each other. If nothing else, the extremely girly way in which this was edited would have automatically banished it from Boys Planet, because as much as that show wanted to milk the gayness of the trainees, it would never make them actively feminine. That said, Girls Planet literally says, will they get the girl they hope for? That also to me seems very gay. Now begins something I'd like to do in this episode. I can't reasonably critique every single shot on the show for this episode as much as I would like to, because considering the show is 30 hours and how in-depth I like to analyse things, my analysis would probably end up being 60 hours or more. So what I will do is include short segments from the show, and I want you to think about the different elements of the segment as I play it. And then I'll replay it and point out all the different things that give the clip emotional importance, the meaning, or whatever else that Mnet wanted it to have. If you're ever curious about how the affect of the show would come across without the editing, I'd recommend watching it with no sound. We obviously can't get rid of the video editing, but sound does a lot for our perception of emotion, especially in shows like this, and removing that sound can do a lot. So let's start with the first clip, the introduction of the girls. I did, however, in my notes, critique the connection idea as well, since it was a great idea but was never really used since the girls were pitted against each other constantly, both within and between country groups. However, the idea of a new discovery is a good one for the revamp of Produce, since, well, Girls Planet was a new discovery after the end of Produce. Coming back to languages, the show proclaims that Girls Planet's only language is K-pop, which is ironic since not only did only 3 global trainees make it to the final group, but they also didn't have translators for the trainees, and the show itself was intensely Korean-rigged and biased. One thing I really disliked throughout the show was how there were no subtitles for people's names. The name tags they wore had English names as smaller subtitles, but when they actually spoke, there were no names in the subs, despite there being Korean names shown on screen. Sorry, I don't know everyone's names in Korean characters. This leads to a lot of my notes saying this girl, that girl, or giving vague descriptions of people. These 3-person keyword introductions go on for a while. We get some unique ones, such as the center girls who aren't actually the centers of their respective groups, and the almost debuted together group whose purpose is clearly to be promoted with a tragic, last chance kind of story. This format is good, as it allows Mnet to introduce us to key trainees twice, once when they are in their cell and once more when they do their demo stage. I got excited that this could actually be a new way for Mnet to introduce every single trainee on the show, but in true Mnet fashion, they had to fast forward it. These trio introductions really show both the language barriers and foreshadow the treatment of trainees on the show. You may notice in a lot of them that the trainees have to resort to broken English to communicate with each other, and are using tons of hand gestures and body language to even attempt to get vague meaning across. This is something that can be seen across the entire show. Even in the last few episodes, trainees are still using English to communicate. I have no doubt that one of the reasons many of the international trainees in the final 18 spoke Korean well was because it was kind of like a natural selection factor. Those who couldn't speak English or Korean would have been unable to communicate and thus would have been more isolated and would have been easier to give a stupid or evil edit to on the show. Another thing you may notice is that a lot of these trios, for example the acting girls, foreshadow the treatment of groups on the show. K-group Lee Chae-yeon is given a big spotlight in this group, C-group Lee Chen-han is given a bit of a mention, and I don't even think we find out the name of the Japanese trainee. We see the beginnings of the C-group evil editing through other groups like the Quite Good Dancers. The Chinese contestants during this segment are shown to be overly confident and dramatic, with dramatic zooms and sound effects, in contrast to the K and J group contestants who are painted as humble and quiet. This is continued in the all-rounder group, Suyeon, Shana and Yanning. This is the beginning of the Yanning evil edit, as she insults Shana's ability to be an all-rounder. This is classic Mnet. Evil Chinese person becomes the villain while the Koreans are heroes. Suyeon is a great fit for a hero, and the Japanese become either bystanders or victims of the evil Chinese. Lovely. I'd also like to mention a little moment where everyone said they were hungry. Apparently this demo stage filming took over 40 hours to film, during which time the trainees were not allowed to sleep and were given very little food and water, so it's no wonder that not only were they all incredibly hungry, but many of them weren't able to perform at their best, hence explaining many of the mediocre demo stages that we get on these shows. You can't expect someone with no sleep who is starving and thirsty to perform at their best, and this is possibly one of the reasons why we see so many people have trash demo stages and then decent or even stellar round 1 and 2 stages. They may be tired, hungry, thirsty, and annoyed in the later rounds, but definitely not so much as in the beginning. As in typical produce fashion, this show has to build up to the finale right from the start. And as always, we get the massive and insane glorification of rank 1, to the point that being rank 1 makes you seem like an actual god. I've always hated this in these shows because at the end of the day there's very little difference between rank 1 and 9, and no difference between ranks 2 to 9. The only extra thing rank 1 gets is to be the centre, and even then Mnet doesn't always act like they are the centre. Let me show you how needlessly dramatic this is with a clip. Something else interesting that Girls Planet did differently from Boys Planet was having the initial top 9 being decided by the mentors, not the audience. This could well have been another way Mnet compensated for their lack of ability to actually rig the show, instead needing to use structure and editing. By having the initial top 9 pointed out by the judges, they get to say, "Oh look, this is basically what we want the group to be like, so get ready to vote for these people." But they don't say it explicitly. Instead, the judges act as experts, thus giving these choices more weight and authority than they would have if Mnet just said it. Although my notes are way too long to actually discuss in depth, I would really recommend you try rewatching the show with a critical eye for editing and sound choice, just as my clips are showing. For instance, looking at how moments can be spliced together to create new meaning, how sound can create a mood, and how these people have been edited into a story. For instance, Shinwei saying that Jingyu is ugly is a nice upbeat moment in between dramatics, and because it serves its purpose well as a comic relief, it continues throughout the rest of the series and is referenced basically every time Shinwei has screen time. I find it fascinating how, through the power of both structuring the activities the trainees have to do and through the editing, Mnet are able to perfectly follow an interest curve, with dramatic and sad moments interspersed with more light-hearted moments which make us attached to the trainees. This structure is even followed by the entire show, oscillating between regular episodes, sports days, and other light-hearted events, and the elimination episodes, which are the darkest moments of the show. Over at this point 4 Korean seasons and numerous international ones, Mnet has got the art of these survival shows down to a science. And this is important. The interest curve allows audiences to feel intense emotions while also allowing them time to breathe and relax. This, combined with the goofy moments from the trainees and other fun events, helps make the audience even more invested in their selected trainees, and thus creates the intense fandoms and massively successful groups that come out of these shows. Anyway, just as the top 9 have to be ridiculously hyped up, so do the mentors. In this case, Tiffany and Sunmi get dramatic editing, a confessional where they describe how good they're going to be as mentors, and an introduction described as their fan meeting where they literally make some of the contestants cry. That's how cool they are. I'm very surprised that they kept this shot of Yanin crying since, well, she was the villain of the first half of the show and this humanizes her a lot. But to be fair, it is such a small moment that it could be easy to miss her name, and thus many people may not remember her when she comes around to insulting Yujin. We also, of course, get a dramatic introduction of the cell system, which was an interesting but incredibly controversial and impractical idea. It was likely something else done to try and differentiate Girls Planet from Produce, and thus was ditched as soon as Boys Planet, aka Produce Season 6, came around. It's probably the singular best example of Girls Planet being experimental, but it's funny how the editing handles it, showing animosity towards the other girls in your cell who may let you down. Let me show you with a clip. Another thing that Girls Planet did differently from Produce and thus Boys Planet was having the trainees already ranked before their demo stages instead of being ranked after the demo stages, which is, to be fair, a very iconic part of Produce, so it makes sense why they'd remove it. This, in my opinion, removes all of the drama from the top 9 since, well, we don't know exactly who the top 9 are, but the most likely candidates have already been picked, so there's no drama for the girls. It also upset me that a lot of the girls seemed stressed and upset about their number ranks. It's far harsher than the star system on Boys Planet, because if you were no stars on Boys Planet, you at least had the others who were with you, not knowing that you yourself were 100% definitively the lowest ranked in your group. Before we get into the actual performances though, let's talk about a few really weird things in this episode. And by really weird, I mean really weird. First, the performances themselves. I do wonder how they chose the songs and groups for the performances. It's not by company, connection word, rank, or any other pattern I can see. There are some clear groups with patterns, like Zhao Ting being placed with lower ranking contestants who she will obviously outshine, and the baby monsters being given a concept that would contrast nicely with their aegyo. But then there are groups like Uranus where there seem to be no pattern, and Dayeon's group who have 2 high-ranking trainees, and then Suyeon who's like 18 ranks lower but still does just as well and in fact outshines them and gets the top 9 sticker. There's also no pattern I can see with makeup and costuming. Some groups have relatively equal costuming, like Uranus group and Bahie's, and some don't, like Dayeon's group where Suyeon literally gets bright orange pants to help her stand out, or even Manami's group where several of the trainees get nice form-fitting outfits, and Manami gets this random dress that looks like a potato sack and doesn't suit her at all. Then there's the difference between costumes that complement the dancers and the dance, like Dayeon's group versus groups who look like the combined budget for their outfits was $10, like Bahie's. Her group's outfits look like things I could get for $2 each at the kids section in Target. I actually think I genuinely owned a $10 AUD dress like this when I was 7. I am a genuine believer that the Mr. Chu performance would have seemed much better if the girls were wearing nice dresses, shoes, and maybe a few accessories. But as they are right now, they look cheap, immature, and thus trash. Styling can do a lot. I mean, just look at the Kill This Love battle on Boys Planet, which is why it makes me wonder. I'm sure choices were made on purpose, but why? Did Mnet just decide to sabotage certain trainees by giving them songs that went against their concept and bad outfits, as well as stages later in the filming? Did they pick only for a few like Zhao Ting and let the roll of the dice decide the rest? Did the girls have to dress themselves and do their own makeup? Why were the C trainees the only ones who had their original performers present? I imagine to sabotage them and make them nervous. Similarly, purely by which songs they pick, Mnet decides 1. Who will shine and who won't, 2. Who will do well and who won't, and 3. The concept and image of each group, purely by picking and matching concepts and skills to trainees. For instance, balancing Dayeon's group by giving them dancers like Dayeon and Suyeon, a rapper, Dayeon, and a main vocal, Dayeon, as opposed to giving people like Ziyin, who is an elegant vocalist, a charismatic, dance-heavy song. This also means that we get the image of each group. J group mostly get cute concepts, C group mostly get fierce girl crush concepts, and K group get a greater variety, mostly including high skill and dance-heavy concepts. Hence, we get the image of J group as cute and harmless, C group as vicious and dangerous, and K group as the original and the most talented, and with great duality. Second, the performance order. While we look through these performances, and if you ever rewatch episodes 1 and 2, I recommend you have a look at whose name tags are blurred out. This indicates people whose ranks have been revealed, and thus who have already performed, and can give us some insights as to how Mnet manipulated things. For instance, we can assume that J group performed pretty early on average, yet we know that Dayeon's team had performed before Hikaru's, since Dayeon's name tag is blurred. This means that Dayeon's team would have been able to perform early and fresh, instead of having to wait until the end, which was when they were actually shown to have performed. Mnet probably didn't want them to risk poor conditions when they wanted Dayeon in Kepler from day one. You may notice that many other groups that performed well, like the Baby Monsters, have their ranks blurred, showing that they performed earlier. So it's entirely possible that a lot of the trashy performances we saw were purely out of exhaustion and thirst rather than skill. Continuing on from this is my third point, how ridiculous the initial rankings were. These rankings were based on the performance of the Signal song, and each girl was ranked 1st to 33rd in their group. But these rankings are completely nonsensical. Some people who ranked high, like Bora, initially rank 3, didn't make it into Kepler, and others like Murakami Yume, initially J04, literally got eliminated in the first round and didn't even get the planet pass. On the other hand, some trainees were inexplicably ranked low, like Chai Bing, who was C28, and An Jung-min, who was K30. Both, I would imagine, are generally considered very talented. Chaehyun was ranked K23 and Maya K27, and both were praised consistently throughout the show for their skills. Even Sinwei, who was C33 and didn't do well on the demo stage, ranked 19th overall, making her C06 in the end. These rankings were supposed to serve as a guide for the audience, but they just didn't do that. Otherwise, there is literally no way that people like Yume would have been eliminated and people like Sinwei would have gone through. They seem purely designed to make both the audience and the members stressed. And I can explain why the rankings were so weird, because there were so many factors that led to them. To start, everyone learns choreography at different paces, so some people may have picked up OOO very quickly and some wouldn't have. Some are better or worse at memorizing lyrics. We saw this easily on Boys Planet where Hui, someone I don't think anyone would argue isn't massively talented, struggled to memorize the lyrics for Here I Am. This also gave the Chinese and Japanese contestants a disadvantage as they would have had to learn Korean and Korean pronunciation on top of the actual lyrics. Additionally, some people may have been in poor condition on the day they performed, and some people may have suited the concept better or worse. Jungmin, for example, may have been affected by this. She suited Black Mamba far better than OOO. We can also see this as many people who had mediocre demo stages. A lot of the C group girls, including the twins and Xiaoting's teammates, Bahie's group and many others, did far better in the later stages. They were probably less stressed, better fed and rested, and more stable in general. The moral of the story is, as these shows will show and use for drama again and again, the demo stage means next to nothing, and the ranking in the demo stage, or in this case before it, also means next to nothing. AKA OT8s who say Bahie didn't deserve her spot in the group and is clearly lacking skills purely because of her K26 rank? Shut up, that is meaningless. Finally, I want to discuss the weird order in which they seem to have filmed things. From flashback footage, it looks like they were all trained for the signal song evaluation together, and then ranked each other and were ranked. We know this because we see their ranks during the demo stage. But it seems like they did this in country groups. But this means that everyone should know each other and should have made friendships. So why didn't they know that Bahie and Yujin were there? Or for that matter, more famous trainees like Chaehyun, or already debuted idols like Yeso, the Cherry Bullet members, and so on? And why were they surprised to see people's ranks and to see who the centers were? They literally evaluated each other? This can be incredibly confusing, but I think that they only trained together in country groups, ranked each other in country groups. As I said, this script was a bit weird to write. You'll notice that the only ones really making comments about Yujin are C and J group trainees, while the K group trainees speak to her more colloquially. Additionally, only the cellmates of people seem surprised at ranks, which makes sense since they are from other groups. But this comes back around in the Yujin Yanning drama. The judges ask Yanning if she knew the original singer of Helicopter would be there, which is a stupid question in and of itself, since it implies that Yanning picked the song, which she didn't, Mnet did. But Yanning answers, yes, we did know, which must be a fake out on her part because she wouldn't have known as a C group trainee. It was likely part of her confidence facade, but we'll talk more about Yanning later. Anyway, the moral of the story is that this is really weird, and Mnet really needs a continuity editor because if anyone with a shred of observational skills watches this, they'll notice all of the inconsistencies. With all of that complaining done, let's move on to the actual performances. We get Xiaoting first. We need to keep the drama and interest going by introducing a rank 1, of course. As I discussed previously, this team and song, as well as the costuming, was obviously chosen to highlight Xiaoting. Not only is she a far higher rank than the others, but she also gets a simple yet flattering costume, gets a standout hair colour, and is the leader. This song allows her to show her charisma and dance skills, two things she advertised herself on, and also allows her to show her rap and leadership skills. The fact that the other trainees get, in the case of Sinwei, trashy costuming and are lower ranked than her, thus assumed to have less skills, as well as suiting the concept less than her, just makes Xiaoting shine more and gives her what is essentially an angel edit. But at the same time, this performance shows the power of editing perfectly. I'm not going to show everything here since footage that long will probably get me a copyright strike if I don't already get one, but I really recommend you pause this video and right now go and watch on YouTube, first the version of the performance that Mnet aired with all of the reactions and everything, and second the regular performance without any editing. Because I did that, and seriously, the actual performance is nowhere near as bad as Mnet portrayed it to be. By criticising the other members and showing all of their mistakes and having cool editing which emphasised Xiaoting's skill, they made the gap between her and the rest of the members seem far larger than it actually was. Like, Jingshao especially wasn't perfect, but she was still pretty good. And this is the case for many other performances, which I will mention later. Urina's group is the first J group, and they have a similar thing going on where the only trainees ranked higher than Urina are criticised, and Urina's point moves are emphasised, hence, highlighting Urina. When you watch these segments, pay attention to who gets a backstory, because the ones who do are instantly more likely to get in. So far, we have Xiaoting, Ririka, who is in the Nizi project, and Urina. The first K-group demonstrates my point that K-group are all about skill and duality. Chaehyun also gets a backstory and the sob story that K-group all dedicated their teen years to trying to debut. Like, did C and J group not do this too? Yet again, this is Mnet propping up K-group as the best and the most sympathetic. This is another one where editing takes the cake. Chaehyun's mistakes are pretty hard to notice in the non-edited version. But Mnet likes Chaehyun as a vocalist and they want to give her an improvement arc, hence she has to start from a lower position, making mistakes, and K23. With the second group we get Youngin and Jia, two people who both seem to be ranked lower than they should have been. They obviously get highlights, and especially Youngin, who they clearly wanted in the group. This kooky, crazy, energetic but charismatic on stage highlight for Youngin does her wonders. It showcases her variety skills and energy as well as performance skills. Then we get Mashiro and Nagami. Watching this performance, I felt that Mashiro's facials were lacking, but she overall did a good job and she got the essential last chance backstory that pulls people's heartstrings on these shows. So I'm not surprised she got a highlight and got into Kepler. The choice of this performance for Mashiro was probably also to hype her up with a simpler concept so she could show her duality and versatility later. Hence we reach the fast-forwarded section that these shows use to 1. Give us a break, 2. Show us that time has passed even if it hasn't, and 3. So Mnet can pretend that they gave all of these trainees screen time even when they really didn't. After said pause, we need something super dramatic to pull us back in. And since J Group has just been painted as sweet and pretty, what better performance than Hikaru's, which is girl crush, not cute, and which has the automatic interest point of having JO1 in the group. Obviously, Hikaru gets backstory, including her sweet reaction to being rank 1. The performance was good, but I felt like it wasn't appropriate for their ages, especially the whole "I don't need a boy, I need a man" thing. Like, no, you do need a boy, since you are a girl, not a woman. Hikaru also gets the mandatory highlight that she is hardworking, intelligent, has good leadership skills, and learns Korean well, which is crucial for securing her debut with a Korean audience. They also highlighted Shana, who I think they probably wanted in the group. I've always found the focus on the superiority of K-group to be really weird on these shows. Like, usually these trainees are shown as humble and kind, so why and how are they suddenly uber nationalistic and confident to the point of being full of themselves? Have they been directed in that way? This also brings a lot of questions about things like the judging. Is the simple fact that Hikaru learned her rap in Korean one of the reasons she got rank 1? since it would make her more sympathetic to the judges. I'm sure lots of people did this though, so only highlighting Hikaru just makes me angry that the effort of so many others went ignored. Anyway, we get to Dayeon's group next. They would have put Dayeon here because she's relatively early in the performance list. Hence, not only are more people more likely to be watching the live stream, but she's also not in poor condition, as in not being as exhausted and so on. She is also the last of the 3 centres to perform, so not only is she, as such, the epic finale and fresh in people's minds, but she's also with a well-rounded group whose concept suits them, and this adds to the drama of her not getting a top 9 sticker, since the other 2 centres did. I've heard a lot of people say that if Suyeon didn't have different coloured pants, Dayeon and Dayeon would have been given more of a chance to get a top 9 sticker, to which I say no. Dayeon never would have got a top 9 sticker because Mnet wants to give her an underdog arc, and Dayeon is a situation of someone being given a higher signal song rank than I think they actually deserved. She must have been in a good condition and had good vocals, because she never really stood out in the rest of the show, partially because of editing, and was subsequently eliminated early. I think she's far better as just a vocalist than an idol because, well, she just doesn't catch the eye, only the ear. Next, we get to the Mnet of K-Group, the baby monsters, who, as I mentioned earlier, were in a great position where they 1. Performed early, 2. had the advantage of being charming Mnet, and 3. had a song that contrasted their cute image, which was still within their skill level, thus letting them create a great impression. They're another example of weird rankings, with Yeso starting at K13, Maya at K27, Seon at 24, and Chaeyeon at 17. Also, Maya still has teeth growing in. Mnet, when your trainees are still growing their teeth, you know they're too young for a K-pop group. She's literally only turning 18 this year in 2024. Anyway, I'm glad they got the type of girl crush that is cool girl crush, not sexy girl crush. Yeso, of course, gets a backstory which starts her arc of being consistently dependable, hardworking, and experienced, with leadership and performance skills. I think it's pretty clear that Mnet wanted either her or Maya as the Mnet of Kepler, but they probably preferred her to Maya. It's a shame Maya didn't debut in a way. I'm glad she didn't because she was way too young, but it's weird and upsetting that we heard almost nothing from her since, apart from her actual debut, which was after I wrote this script. Speaking of performances being edited to be so much worse than they actually were, we get the twins from C Group. The show painted this performance as very cute but completely trash, which is really stupid in my opinion. They came to a different country and learned a song that was clearly out of their range in a language they didn't know and that they were likely unfamiliar with. The twins have spoken publicly a few times about how terrible their time on the show was, and in the end, I think they did pretty well. Obviously, they were slightly out of sync and the vocals weren't great, but their dancing, execution of the concept, and facial expressions, in my opinion, were pretty good. Lots of energy and attention to detail. It shouldn't surprise us that they both did so much better in the 5th season with a song that suited them better. Anyway, I thought the concept outfits and editing of them in general was very weird. It was infantilizing and made them the butt of the joke rather than laughing with them as it did with people like Youngin. Throughout the show, the twins are portrayed as unskilled and stupid, and it's a point of amazement when they actually manage to do something well, and frankly, I find that really insulting to them. Imagine being edited like this on such a big show. Not to mention the fact that a lot of their issues seem to come purely down to illness and to not understanding Korean. It's very upsetting. On a similarly upsetting note, we get to a 15-minute break the girls take. This cues Bahie to say that her butt hurts, and we see how people are falling asleep, which makes sense since you'll remember earlier that these demo stages apparently took 40 hours to film or something. It was really nice of Jinggu to cheer them up, but it's really weird that Mnet kept this in my opinion. It is literal evidence of how bad the trainees and presumably the lay staff and judges were treated on the show. The only reason I can think of is because it's cute to see people falling asleep, and to angel edit Jingu yet again. But it's not cute when the girls are super nervous, but are falling asleep because they've literally been awake for more than a full day. Mnet baffles me. It's also entirely possible that this is the reason why the judges started getting more irritable around this point. They were probably also tired and annoyed, but it does unfortunately add to the evil editing of Chinese trainees. Tammy's knee also looks like it's bleeding a bit when she comes out for Wannabe. Anyway, back to Chinese trainees. I find it so weird that the show highlights the hardships of being a Chinese or Japanese contestant and then expects them to still be able to perform on the same level as K-group trainees. Like, hello, Mnet? Hypocrites. Anyway, at this point we get to the well and truly hyped helicopter performance by Yanning and her team. And I have a lot to say about this performance. It's yet another example of the weird evil editing of Chinese contestants, but really weird. Mnet showed us that Yanning was nervous and only dissed Yujin to make her team feel more confident. Thus, they just humanized her. So why were so many people saying that Yanning was arrogant for weeks, months, and even years after this? The show literally gave us proof that she wasn't, and that she felt forced into saying this, a fact that she confirmed herself later. Was this to set her up for a redemption arc right from the start? Maybe? My pet theory is that Mnet actually wanted Yanning in the group, or at least might have been okay with her in it. They humanized her in this episode by showing her duality and her smiling and laughing with the judges. They also showed her skills several times throughout the show, and trust me, had they leaned more into it, the Yujin Yanning enemies to friends arc would have been brilliant, and the potential catharsis of them ending up in the same group together would have been brilliant. This almost even happened. Yanning would have made it into Kepler if it wasn't for the heavy weighting of Korean votes over international ones. So if Mnet's purpose wasn't to give her a redemption arc, they edited this really badly, literally showing us that she was anxious and putting on a brave facade. I have no clue how people fell for this at the time. However, the fact that they did fall for it and started hating her might have been why Mnet abandoned any potential redemption. On a different note, you can see from the blurred name tags that a lot of people performed before them, possibly meaning that exhaustion could have contributed to things like Wonje's botched vocals. But this is also, despite its weird editing, a great example of how much editing can do to create drama on these shows. Let me show you Yanning's diss and then point out everything that Mnet did to it. It's also yet another example of a performance that was edited to be far worse than it actually was. Then of course we get Yujin, who is hyped up and given a sad backstory about how her group is falling apart. Somehow she gets an underdog arc even though she's literally a debuted idol who is practically guaranteed to get into Kepler. The zooms on her feet and her heels make her stand out more, since she was the only one dancing barefoot, but it unfortunately also looks like she has some bruises and cuts. I feel like she was made to perform in around the middle, something we can tell from the people with blurred name tags, and this was probably done to see whether it would break her or not, being so tired and dehydrated and so on. If she breaks, they can give her an underdog and redemption arc, or they can choose to give her a talentless edit like they tried to do with Hui on Boys Planet if they decide they don't like her. And if she does well, they get to continue her angel edit and show how she's great in the face of hardship. This was possibly why she took off her shoes, being in poorer condition and anxious, and of course you don't want to dance in heels when you're like that. But in the end, she's an experienced idol, and something as petty as 40 hours without sleep couldn't break her. Gosh, I love Yujin. She was seriously brilliant and comedic throughout this entire show. Anyway, because we need to have a drama cliffhanger to lead into the next episode, that is the end of the episode, and we are left waiting for the most anticipated performance. Let me take you through the episode 2 preview and show you all of the editing hijinks Mnet performs. And with that, let's move on to the next episode. The intro continues our understanding of K and J group as talented, while the zoom on Ruchi's entrance and the fierce descriptor for C group continues to paint them as possibly more sinister and nasty than the K and J groups. It is a bit weird that they're still blurring the ranks of people whose ranks have already been revealed though. Why? Anyway, getting right into it, we get to the Go-Go Bebe team with Reina, who gets a highlight as the main vocal with a stellar audition. There's a funny duality of her powerful vocals and her calm demeanour. The fact that Mnet includes the judge reactions and everyone vibing here suggests that it's seen as a good performance, and keep this in mind throughout the show. A performance could be made to seem far better or worse depending on the audience and especially judge reactions. Why do you think there's so many almost identical clips of one-star cringing going around? And we even know that Mnet reuses these clips. You have to look at the background to tell, since he almost always makes the same face. Mnet even got caught for this on Boys Planet, showing him cringing to a trainee performing while at the same time the trainee was literally sitting behind him waiting to perform. Anyway, after all of that and a little break to highlight the judges, we get to the Mr. Chu group, which of course includes terrible dresses and Bahie. Just a reminder that 1. This group is very young overall, 2. This group had a very short training period overall, 3. This group was very nervous overall, which probably was compounded by their low rankings, and 4. This group likely performed towards the end of the demo stages, hence was likely stiff, exhausted, and thirsty. I don't think it's at all surprising that they didn't give the best performance, but all of them did far better in the later performances and have well and truly shown their skills in my opinion, if only they weren't given those hideous dresses. Anyway, we get this scripted Bahie section that made all of the OT8s super mad. Just a reminder to everyone, 18-year-old Korean age Bahie would not have had the power to bring Kai onto this show to talk to her, and she wouldn't have had the power to get them to remove her surname, mention her on the show, and air her video call with Kai. There is an almost 100% chance that the drama and view-hungry producers put a piece of paper in front of Tiffany saying "yo, talk about her brother," and then got both Kai and Bahie to sign something saying they would do the call and then of course to actually do it. It's so completely and obviously scripted and inserted basically only for clout, since it doesn't even highlight Bahie, just Kai, and doesn't make us at all excited for Bahie as a person. I may as well also mention now, since I'm on the topic of Bahie, that a lot of OT8s say they wouldn't hate her as much if she 1. Didn't have a rabid fanbase, 2. Actually showed skills on Girls Planet and tried out for important positions, or 3. Debuted normally, not through a survival show. And I call complete BS. If her fans weren't rabid, people would still hate her for her supposed lack of skills. If she had shown herself more on the show, people still would have found fault with her skills, with her going on the show, with her performances, with her fans, with her as a person, and more. And that isn't even mentioning how she did try for important positions. She got Vocal 2 twice, which she would have had to try for. Vocal 2 isn't the lowly position people seem to act like it is. That's the 3rd vocal position on the team. Finally, even if she had debuted with a group normally, which wasn't likely since at this point she'd left Cube, people would still be calling nepotism and saying that the company only debuted her to get clout because of Kai, or saying that she got into the group because of Kai or whatever else. Even if Bahie had done everything right, slayed every high note and got every single killing part, had no rabid fans, or even debuted regularly as such, people would still hate her, purely because of her relationship to Kai and because they think she's ugly. She can't do anything right and the bar will always move. She could even have done tons of variety things behind the scenes and we wouldn't know because Mnet didn't air them. So I say Bahie did a perfectly fine job on the show. She played it safe, she avoided evil edits, and got good vocal parts which suited her. She was kind, encouraged others, and did everything required of her. She seemed to be loved by the judges and other contestants alike. I don't know what more you want from her. Anyway, she isn't my bias in Kepler, but she is a queen whose improvement is almost unparalleled, so good on her. Anyway, onto the actual performance. It's fine. It's not as bad as everyone seems to say it is, and Bahie, although she probably did the best in the group, didn't carry nearly as much as her fans say she did. I genuinely think, as I've said many times by now, that the performance would seem a lot better if they actually had good and flattering outfits. However, I still did think it was nice that everyone thought they were cute in their outfits, and it's explicitly mentioned that their average training period is only a bit more than a year, which is very short, so realistically, how much more can we actually expect from them? This is yet another performance that's done dirty by Mnet's editing. The full unedited version of the performance is perfectly serviceable. It's lacking in skill and execution of the concept, but the potential is definitely there. I genuinely think that if the girls hadn't been as nervous and hadn't performed as late in the lineup as they seemingly did, they would have done much better. They were probably over 20 hours at least without sleep and much food, and without much water by this point. But in the aired episode, Mnet includes Sunmi gulping and watching the trainees looking horrified, which makes the performance seem far worse than it actually was. Interestingly, Bahie, unlike the other members, has no highlighted mistakes in the performance, and this, combined with the highlighting of a goofy relationship with her brother and the consolidation of her short training period, gives her a decently positive edit in this performance, a far cry from how both her fans and antis alike paint this episode. At the end of the day, they just needed more experience, and this show was probably more of a putting them out into public awareness than actually expecting any of them to debut. After that, we get the K-group Fireworks team, who have a few highlighted members, Doa from Produce 48 and Hyerim from Lime Soda. Doa is the one with the highlight and the backstory. She is yet another last chance person and is painted as another forgotten girl group person. Using the sad music and shots of other K-group members crying makes Doa the face of K-group's grief and their last chance narrative. But interestingly, there were, and always are in survival shows, far too many people painted with the last chance storyline than can actually physically make it into the group. There were more than 9 last chance girls on Girls Planet, and in the end, only really Mashiro, Chaehyun, and Yujin had anything related to a last chance storyline in the final group. Anyway, this group is mentioned to have high standards, which means they will either fail miserably or do super well, and the combination of one star looking satisfied and the other contestants gasping is all they need to be seen as a good performance. There were some mistakes in this performance, especially in the dance, but these positive reactions have a big impact in covering that up. But of course, just for the tension, we have the dramatic music before they get praised. Also, showing the members holding hands and crying evokes a lot of sympathy in the audience, and you're far more likely to vote for someone you feel sympathy and empathy towards. Finally, I want to mention something very odd. They show Helicopter Team backstage during this performance, which is further proof of how wacky and out of order these performances were. We get a goofy break where the judges freak out about how many people they've given a top 9 sticker to, which is a nice tension break and humanises the judges. Then we get to Ruchi's performance where everyone is saying that she's super talented and shots of her helping the other contestants, which make her seem like a super skilled and nice person. I genuinely think that Mnet kind of wanted her in the final group, or at least in the final 18, but when it became clear that so many people hated her for her online comments and other things, they took the opportunity to semi-evil edit her, and thus backtracked on their earlier positive representation of her. Anyway, it's a nice highlight for her, as is her ace card marketing. I found it odd that she was literally applauded for making it to CO2, like, why? Her massive confidence could bring her storyline to a halt, but her deference towards Xiaoting and their friendship pretty much sorts this out. Including this segment shows that Mnet likes both Ruchi and Xiaoting. Her performance was good, but the stunned reactions from the audience make it seem much better, and many of her skills are highlighted, like the use of rhythm and following the camera, which are good idol skills. Also, her being delighted with the judges' comments paints her as being humble as well as confident, which is just good idol attitude. Next we get K14 Seungin, who I've never heard of before, even though she was supposed to be really good. She ended up being eliminated in episode 5, which is kind of crazy, but I guess that's just how it goes with the cell system and when you get almost no screen time. Then we have another fast-forwarded segment and the Maria team, who are shown to be super good since they get lots of cheers. We also have Bora's team, who get lots of vocal praise and top 9 stickers, which of course highlights them. Then we get the massive build-up to Eugen's performance, which is, of course, right at the end, even though it was also right at the end of the previous episode. Mnet needs the watch hours from people waiting for Eugen, people. She also, of course, gets the tense music and the sob story and the discussion of being invisible in CLC, which will make her solo performance with a song that suits her seem far better by comparison. The fact that the judges ask her what she wants to hear as feedback and talk to her as equals also raises her status. She also gets the excuse of being in bad condition, which makes her slaying seem even better, but would also have excused a bad performance if the performance had been bad. We then, of course, get a lot of the judges being happy, choreography adjusted camera work to emphasize hip movements which are important for the song, shots of her eyes skillfully following the camera, and more. This shows that she is our hero, and this is the start of her angel edit on the show. Everglowup once said that Eugen was the angel main character of Girls Planet, and that by associating themselves with her, trainees could make themselves seem better, and I completely agree with this. She really was the angel of the show, although not so much the main character, especially since the judges point out how she isn't on the show for selfish reasons. FYI, they definitely picked a song that they knew she could do a good job with for her, specifically to help her get a better edit and seem more competent. We also, of course, get the nervous and tense music before she's announced as a top 9 candidate. Of course they'll drag it out. So far, Eugen fans have been waiting for over 3 hours of this show just to see if she has a good chance on it. Anyway, her emotional reaction to the announcement that all the masters passed her, a phrase which is obviously tailored to make her more emotional, increases her positive edit. It's kind of funny how she got all of the arcs on the show. She got to be confident and experienced, the underdog, well-known, but also on her last chance, and she got the unconfident and improvement arcs. Then we get a really interesting moment. There is a comment that there is no ratio for KCJ for the final lineup, which makes me wonder how in the world people who watched the show at the time thought there was one. It was literally stated in the second episode. Do K-pop fans have no critical viewing skills and comprehension? Anyway, what is more interesting is that after this, one girl calls that the final lineup will be mostly K-group, and this one J-group girl correctly predicts that there will only be 3 global trainees, so she needs all of the credit. At this point, we get to where the concept of cells is explained. Survive together, get eliminated together, and we get the reorganizing of cells. This is a really interesting segment because it shows how the cell system and the group system changes people from friends to enemies, and it shows the difference between people who will potentially self-sabotage in the name of kindness and good reputation for their original cellmates, and the people who will attempt to do whatever is best for them, no matter how selfish it might make them look. This segment is the definition of the competitive and tense nature of a survival show, and how people really need to look out for their own survival. It's also funny to see the tense music for literally no reason when people are announced for the top 9. But of course, Eugen gets to look nervous since she's a sweetie, and Yeonjun gets to be overconfident since she's the arrogant villain of the show. The fact that they play this segment like an elimination also shows how insanely dramatic Mnet needs to make things for next to no reason. But the awkward thing about uneven screen time distributions earlier in the show means that I have no clue who most of these people are. The show even has the audacity to suggest that since the judges' top 9 has so many global trainees, the final group will be decently even? Really? But in the end, Mnet manipulated the voting against global trainees. And Yesai being so happy with her result is endearing and definitely got her more voters. Interestingly, Dayeon says that her pride is hurt, which could come off as arrogant, but unlike the C group trainees, her statement is painted in a much better light, since she was already KO1 and has been given an underdog arc. Anyway, then the cell reshuffle happens, and I find it weird that they said the trainees would get to vote on whether to stay or shift cells, but then they just straight up decide to change cells based on the ranks. Did the voting happen off screen? I'm surprised they didn't milk drama out of that. Here I have a controversial opinion. I think the cells were a really good and interesting idea. They were unique and they brought a lot of drama and engagement to the show and freaked a lot of fans out. It also did a great job of playing off the KCJ dynamic and distancing the show from produce, which was crucial. In the end, though, I think it did cause a lot of issues for the final group since many talented people were eliminated very early. Then we get to the picking of the cells, and Dayeon makes what seems like a cocky comment about how they would surely get good votes, but since this statement is edited in such a neutral way, no one cares, it flies under our radar. God forbid a Chinese trainee would say something like this though, they would be instantly murdered by fans and Mnet alike. And of course we get the sad edit for Dayeon. Her original cellmates don't want her, even though she did a good job, because she didn't get to the top 9. In this segment, I found out that both Bahie and Suyeon stayed in their original cells. I also thought this whole segment had a ridiculous amount of needlessly tense editing, like the girls being shocked that everyone other than the top 9 create cells within each other and the stress of the free-for-all cell creation. Like, did it really need to be that dramatic? Anyway, this segment is good for highlighting some trainees Mnet wants to highlight as being skilled and in demand. And yet again, I would like to reiterate, how did people think the final group would be just 3 of these cells? The show literally never said that, and in fact suggested otherwise, since it mentioned how there wasn't a cap on the number of girls from a particular group that would make it in. I am yet again losing faith in K-pop fans and their comprehension skills. But at the same time, the vast majority of people who watch these survival shows are likely very young, and thus haven't even had a chance to be taught that yet, which is insane and explains why the editing works. Anyway, at this point we get to the dramatic voting, glorifying the fans and emphasizing how the fate of the girls is in the hands of the fans. It makes the audience feel powerful and appreciated, which is good in that it gives them a sense of self-efficacy which can lead to them voting. But on the other hand, it lets them think that they have the power to go up against the decisions of a massive corporation. Power they definitely don't have in such small and unorganized numbers. After that, we get everyone coming to the planet camp, which acts as a nice break in the episode and allows Mnet to pretend that they're actually treating the trainees well, by showing the camp clean and tidy and by showing the trainees being happy and goofy. It mostly lets Mnet highlight some people for their personalities and other shenanigans rather than their skills, like highlighting the pharmacy girl who has products made by her sister. It also highlights, for those who are paying attention, how insanely embedded the language barriers are between the trainees, as they are seriously struggling and continue to use English in an attempt to communicate better. The fact that some of the global trainees don't know the rules of Korean games is also really sad. It demonstrates how the language barrier will likely lead to them feeling alienated, and considering how many Chinese trainees especially have spoken about how terrible their experience was, I think it's really sad to see how Mnet has edited everything to be positive. I'd like to highlight here how a good chunk of this is very likely scripted, including Dayeon's sob story, and literally every single time the camp is praised by the trainees. Also, highlighting the fact that Yujin gets acne is really good. It humanizes her and of course leads to her having more screen time, which is never a bad thing. I absolutely love how in the morning we get the inclusion of the film crew and the staff. I love when reality shows and other shows include the staff. Like when we see the cameramen reunite with idols they were supposed to chase, or when 17 makes deals with the staff on Going 17. I also found it very funny how many of the girls who have clearly watched or been on survival shows before expected a morning mission. On one hand, the idea of a morning mission which brings cellmates closer together is a nice one, but on the other hand, the time pressure seems to make the trainees, especially people like Yujin, super stressed. And as much as their barefaced, sleepy goofiness is fun, and Dayeon's barefaced reaction to being on camera is very humanizing, these scenes do make me wonder about how much sleep the trainees and staff got. I don't think it's good to wake up to stress first thing in the morning. Hence, we get some screen time for Bahie, featuring what is likely the single most unflattering childhood photograph she has. I like the highlight of Hikaru and Ruchi being sweet, and Hikaru being really dedicated, and the highlight of Yeso and Chaibing being good members for their respective cells. Anyway, here we get to Jingu yet again, and the girls loving him yet again, and the first mission which will always be as dramatic as possible. The huge mood change between the cuteness of the morning mission and the stress of the actual mission could give some whiplash, and that is exactly the editing style that Mnet likes to go with a lot. So this is the Connect mission, featuring 3 cells per song, with each song having 2 teams who will battle it out for the benefit, except for 3 boy group songs which will battle against each other. Girls Planet had a really interesting structure, where your potential benefit would depend on the song you picked. For example, if you picked a song with more members and thus theoretically easier to perform, you would get a smaller benefit than if you picked a harder song or a song with less members. It was an interesting risk versus reward choice for the trainees to make. Anyway, Dayeon's concerns about the organisation and communication of these groups were very warranted. Before the song reveals for this round is this hilarious moment. When the curtain falls, the girls are understandably scared and shocked by the sudden noise and movement, but it's hilarious to think that once the curtain fell, the filming would have to pause for a minute or so while the staff removed the curtain from the floor, before Jungkook announces the songs. Just imagining everyone just standing there and waiting for the curtain to be moved makes me laugh inside. So, for the songs for these rounds, we have 2 copies each of Fiesta by IZ*ONE, How You Like That by Blackpink, The Fifth Season by Oh My Girl, and Yes or Yes by Twice. The 3 boy group songs who have 1 team each and will battle it out with each other are Pretty You by 17, The Eve by EXO, and Mic Drop by BTS. Interestingly, with the way this is filmed and edited, Mnet has the choice to make some edits which foreshadow later events. For instance, they show Bahie looking excited at Fiesta and Zian saying she wants to avoid the Eve. The fact that the teams get to pick in order of their morning mission is interesting, but it also seems like way too big of a benefit to give for such a small mission. It also makes me wonder about how much time the girls and teams had to discuss what they wanted to do. By the looks of other shows like Boys Planet, these things seem to take forever to film. Whichever girl mentioned that the top 9 will get a lot of screen time knows what's going on. You can also see here that some of them have pimple patches on, which is again a nice point of humanization. It's also really interesting to see how they all have differing levels of makeup. Was this depending on who could do their own makeup the fastest before they started filming? Did Mnet's makeup artists discriminate? Why does Bahie's makeup here suit her face so much more than the makeup in the demo stage? Speaking of Bahie, her humanizing moment for this episode is when she's upset that her cell didn't get picked. This is a really interesting moment, and I'm surprised that Mnet included it if they didn't want her in the group. It opens her up to a very sympathetic arc and is comparable to the arcs that other popular trainees like Ganook got. This moment and the large number of reaction shots Bahie got over the course of the show made me develop my conspiracy theory that actually, maybe, Mnet didn't mind if Bahie made the group. They definitely didn't try to shove her out of the show by evil editing or anything else, and they didn't kick her out of Kepler. Based on her editing throughout the show, which is nowhere near as invisible as her fans and haters say it was, I think that Mnet actually did want her in the top 18, but perhaps not in the actual group. At the end of the day, they were probably relatively indifferent to her as an actual trainee, but they wanted her name and clout and views. Once we get past the first episode, it wouldn't do for them to always bring up Kai with her, so they just need to give her screen time to keep people watching. And I think Bahie worked with this well, by playing the show as safe as possible, which is, by the way, a very valid strategy for survival shows. She didn't give them anything to evil edit her with, although this did come with the downside of them not seeing her as doing much that was interesting, and thus reducing her screen time. If there was one moment that guaranteed her debut, it was probably this one, where she cried about her group and said she wants to do better and make them stand out. Anyone who was thinking about voting for her but wasn't convinced was probably convinced after this emotional moment. Alright, moving on. Finally, we get the announcement of the first eliminations and the planet pass, which is of course very dramatic. I'm also not sure why Xiaoting is anxious here. She's practically guaranteed to debut as the centre of the signal song. Finally, I also want to say that I really like the Planet Pass, and I'm very sad it wasn't kept for Boys Planet. It was a great tool for Mnet and for the judges, but mostly Mnet, to show who they wanted in the group. It also gave trainees a second chance and brought them more fans, which was often helpful. I mean, Wonjae got the Planet Pass in the first eliminations and went all the way to the finale afterwards, and became a very loved trainee by fans and fellow contestants alike. She was probably Mnet's second choice for a Chinese contestant. And with that, we get our mandatory stress-inducing next episode teaser, including an interesting Bahie spotlight, and that's it for episode 2. At the start of this episode, I was shocked by the fact that Bahie's cell had made it as high as number 5. I didn't realise they got that high. We also get the continuation of the segregation of the top 9 and the Dayeon underdog arc. At this point, I was shocked that Eugen's team, How You Like That Team 1, hadn't thought of the idea of everyone trying for the killing part. This seems like an obvious and commonly used tactic in survival shows, and I'm shocked that they didn't do it. Anyway, showing that Youngin can adapt from a rapper to a vocalist was a great move on her part, and was one of the things that got her a lot of fans, her ability to do everything well and to shift concept and focus. Dayeon, who is part of How You Like That Team 2, gets a good highlight of leadership skills and humble confidence, which will help define her arc over the rest of the show. Then we get the 2 Fiesta teams, where I was shocked that they all have to practice in the same room. That would really lead to people feeling less confident or overly confident, and would really get in the way of fully productive training. Team 2, of course, gets an underdog storyline, and the awkward editing really paints them as far worse than the other team, especially the emphasis on high notes. People act like a high note makes or breaks a performance, and I think this is a big shame in how survival shows and K-pop in general is handled. Then we get to Yes or Yes teams, where Team 1 has leadership issues and Team 2 gets a more collaborative image, with lots of compliments for Doa, who is also painted as being a perfect trainee, as, despite having the killing part, she picks a small part to be her second part. This group also showcases Ziyan's leadership. Anyway, this is also a good edit for Chaehyun, since it shows her doing a great job of delegating and makes her seem like a good leader, which is important. Then we get to the 5th season, where Team 1 has Bora as their leader. Then we get to the 5th season Team 2. Ryan taking responsibility for being the leader here is a good move on her part, as it allows her to later have the highlight of lacking confidence after the demo stage. She also gets to be the main vocalist and gets stressed about having to go against Bora, which is fair. Unfortunately, Ryan was never known for being a good vocalist, to the point that Mnet could edit this to be a battle of the main vocals, like they managed to do with Hui and Jae on Boys Planet. Then we get to the boy groups, where Pretty You have a good team for their song and understand the importance of being good at performing, just like 17. They also get a cute segment of Ran gaining confidence about her cuteness, but then the sudden turn of her just not getting it. Mic Drop team have issues with having lower ranking trainees and having the expected language barriers and communication issues. Then we get the Eve team, and let me show you how this editing makes Yunning appear very scary. Then they get a bunch of communication and language issues and the start of a kind of evil, kind of good, just generally weird edit of Yu Dayeon. They make her seem determined and paint her as lacking confidence, but they also say that she's feeling bitter, on the verge of a mental breakdown, disrupting the team, and they give her these shifty eyes and tense music to paint her almost as a villain. In the end, she's painted as selfish and envious and made to look really bad. Even though I have no doubt that this footage was edited to look far worse than it actually was, the fact of the matter is that all of these events happened, and similar events do happen on survival shows, so I'm not at all surprised that some people come out of these shows disliking each other. Then we get a break before the performances are shown, which gives us a chance for sad music and messages that the girls wrote to humanize them. They all look very stressed. This segment also shows the classic slow-mo shots of people practicing to show how anxious they are and how hard they're working, of course. This did make me notice though. It looks like each room only has 2 wardrobes, so does that mean that someone doesn't get one? That's a bit weird. Next we get to the very dramatic stage performances. Interestingly, not having an audience, since this was during COVID, could have led to global trainees benefiting slightly more than they did in shows like Boys Planet, since the largely Korean live audiences in Boys Planet were definitely biased towards both previously debuted idols and Korean trainees, but here it's just the judges and Mnet. Just to draw out the episode, we get the dance battle section, which oddly has horror music attached. I think it was supposed to be goofy, but I'm not sure that it had the desired effect. A lot of this is also definitely staged, like people being so ready to dance to the signal song. But I do like that they get the mentors involved, and these types of segments are really important to produce seasons and related shows. They humanise the contestants, they are a break in the drama, and they allow Mnet to highlight the people they want to highlight. In this case, they've used funny sound effects and screen time to highlight Yoojin, Ruchi, Suyeon, Dayeon, Chaibing, and several other girls. I also think that the segment where Yoojin denounces competitiveness and then says that her team needs to win is a great moment for her character, and also of Mnet's editing. Now back to the performances, we start with the Yes or Yes teams, and the music does a lot here to suggest animosity between the teams, which probably doesn't exist nearly as much as the show pretends it does. Cue the flashbacks. In Team 1, K Group gets to lead, which is expected, and of course, if the team does well, it will be reflected on K Group. The awkward lack of music and reactions from the judges, as well as the highlighted mistakes in their interim check, make this group seem like the most trash group ever. This is when we, of course, start to get the harsh feedback. Thus, this makes the K Group members of this team the underdogs. Naturally, Team 2 will do much better than Team 1 for drama reasons. The fact that we see the judges smiling here and the other team being nervous shows how this performance is just better. In the aftermath of this, we get, of course, people crying, looking down, etc. Chaehyun comforting the Japanese girls is a great edit for her. It shows her being inclusive of nationality and just generally being a good person. It's also good for her leadership skills and her idol image. She instantly apologizes for her mistakes and works on fixing them, which is also great for her delegating image. There's a reason she made rank 1, and in this performance, according to the edit, she showed better leadership skills than the leader herself. It also seriously pisses me off how the show literally points out how the team struggled because of language barriers, and then just does nothing to help, despite the fact that Mnet had apparently promised that translators would be on the site 24/7 to help trainees. Either way, showing this team then doing team building activities prepares us for a stellar performance and comeback, as we can see how hard they've worked. As with a lot of performances on these survival shows, we get lots of shots of the judges looking impressed and the other trainees looking nervous, which makes this performance seem really good. Let's be honest, the judge reaction shots here were probably reused multiple times for multiple performances, and the girls were probably just generally nervous, so it's easy to find shots of them looking nervous that could be spliced into literally any performance. And this is yet another performance that shows the power of editing, because I didn't like the rap section for this performance and they made several mistakes, including with vocals, but the editing of the judges looking so happy makes the performance seem brilliant nonetheless. On the bright side, I really did like Chaehyun's deeper voice. The touching music after the performance and the comments about how much they improved are designed to make the audience feel emotions like pride and joy, which will automatically bind them closer to the trainees they liked the most on the team, hence bringing in votes. Honestly, if there was a moment that secured Chaehyun's debut on the show and her high ranking, it was quite possibly her editing in this segment. Then we move on to Team 2, who are shown practicing backstage. Even though all of the teams probably practiced backstage, the fact that this team was highlighted doing so right after Team 1 gave a good performance makes us think that they're bad and nervous. The highlight for this team is Seon and her inability to be a good person, seemingly. Basically, the fact that she seems to put all of the blame on the other members and then they say she's doing badly makes her seem like she's putting responsibility onto other people. Her asking for snacks with this weird music makes her seem selfish and food obsessed, and the implication that she has led to her cell being the worst ranked makes this even worse. Even Dayeon complains about her, and Dayeon is high ranking, pretty, older and more mature, and is the leader. so her complaints are automatically given more weight and authority. The fact that Seyeon looks away from a crying and yelling Wonjae makes her seem even worse and unempathetic. This is a really interesting edit. Seyeon, along with the rest of the baby monsters, was praised in the demo stage, and it was pretty obvious that one of the baby monsters would be the maknae for the final group. But Mnet clearly decided they wanted either Maya or Yeso, and thus took this opportunity to edit Seyeon badly. Seyeon probably did cause an issue for her team, but I find it hard to believe that it was as bad and as big as the show portrayed it to be. But Mnet didn't care that much about her, and they saw she was doing some not so good things, hence the bad edit. And it worked too. Despite her cellmate Wonjae ranking 11th in the C group, Seyeon's evil editing likely led to the overall lack of votes the cell got, which dropped them to rank 18, below the cutoff for eliminations. Basically, this edit worked in getting Seyeon eliminated from the show, and she may or may not have taken Momoko down with her. In the end, she got eliminated, and Wonjae got all the way to the finale, so that's probably an indication of how the viewers perceived this segment. Of course, as a survival show watcher, I and many others probably know that the performance will be great, and Seyeon will do fine, if not brilliantly. And that's how it is. The performance is painted as decent. However, we only get cheering shots of the audience with members like Zian and Wonjae, who we are supposed to like, as opposed to with Seyeon. But there is one problem with this performance. Where are all of Zian's lines? Mnet, hello? Anyway, Wonjae gets the highlight as having improved a lot, and this, compared with Seyeon continuing to get criticised, paints Seyeon as being a big burden on Wonjae. And this really builds us up to Wonjae's miraculous planet pass. But it also probably makes Seyeon feel even worse, which is possibly why she looked so depressed in episode 5. After that, we get the announcement of the winner, which, as with every Mnet reality show, is very dramatic and drawn out for next to no reason. We get dramatic shots of the girls holding hands, them looking nervous and regretful, them crying, and so on and so on. Anyway, after all of that, Team 1 won, which was completely expected since they got next to no criticism and their biggest issue was language barriers. Chaehyun crying here is also a great thing for her image and would have brought in more voters, and it also helps start to resolve her underdog arc from the demo stage. By the way, it really bothers me that the judges on these shows always act like people are cute for crying about winning or losing. Like, that's not cute. They're at a make or break point in their careers, so of course they'll be relieved if they win or depressed if they lose. And Team 2 mentioned not sleeping, which is crazy. Yet more evidence of bad conditions on these shows. Anyway, Zian's skills, followed by her graceful losing speech, definitely boosted her votes. I think she would have been a great member or even leader to the final group. Although her Chinese nationality meant that she probably wouldn't have got through, I still think it's a big shame that she left the show, although I understand why she would. After that, we move on to the How You Like That teams. The introduction of this team with more tense music makes sense and sets the mood, since it's a girl crush song. The fact that the judges say that the competition is close and the painted friendly rivalry between the Kick That team members makes this seem even more tense. I found it funny how Yujin's team's intro showed her idol experience, and the other team looked really awkward in comparison. The contrast between the Avengers team and the underdogs of Team 2 who have a chance to win purely with teamwork is very compelling and means that most people would be happy no matter which team won. This is done mostly through editing. In the flashback scene, Team 1 often look envious of the teamwork of Team 2 before they have their own teamwork issues. This also brings us to the infamous scene where Dayeon is told that she wasn't given a top 9 sticker because the mentors knew that she would get to the top. You can tell I don't like that scene. This also brings us to the infamous scene where Dayeon is told that she wasn't given a top 9 sticker because the mentors knew that she would get to the top 9 anyway. And this scene is complete BS and I hate it. And maybe not for the reasons you think. First is the reason most people hate it. Not only did it show the immense depth of Mnet's favouritism towards Dayeon, but it was also just deeply mean of them to not give the sticker to her in the first episode, despite her doing very well performance-wise. But even further, this is really upsetting for everyone involved. Dayeon over the course of Girls Planet was manipulated by Mnet so that they could show an amazing storyline for her. In the first round, she wasn't given the top 9 sticker when by all rights she really should have been, which would have been a big blow to her confidence as she was the only one of the original centers who didn't get one. To make matters worse, her cellmates seemingly abandon her and her cell is ranked far lower than those of the other 2 centers. After all of that, she's told she deserved the top 9 sticker, but it was kept from her for arbitrary reasons and she wasn't even told about it. And she has a breakdown at this information, as you would expect. Remember, at this time she's around 16 to 17 and has been through a lot, considering she was also on Produce 48. So she goes on to Ice Cream Team and does her best to lead and is praised massively for her leadership and skills, only for her team to lose, and then she is on the verge of getting eliminated only for her rank to suddenly shoot up, and you can see from her reactions in the second and third eliminations that she doesn't think she'll survive. She's lost all confidence because the producers have been so mean to her, and she's been knocked down again and again. And then she's shocked when she makes it into Kepler because of everything they did on the show. And after all of that, the producers favour her, so she gets more lines than she can handle and vocal lines she isn't able to handle, which brings hate to her, compounding on the hate she already received for being Mnet's favourite. So yeah, she may be Mnet's favourite, but life was not easy for Kim Dayeon. Dayeon ran over. Let's also talk about how horrible this is for the other top 9 sticker girls. Because if Dayeon wasn't given one because they knew she would make it anyway, what about the other girls in the other centres? Is this implying that it wasn't guaranteed that Xiaoting and Hikaru would make it? It seems like it's discrediting their skills by association, and that's just shitty of Mnet to do. But hopefully I don't need to convince you that Mnet are shitty. Anyway, we then get to Team 1's interim check with a lack of synchronization and teamwork, mistakes, and both the judges and the trainees generally looking really disappointed. The sharp violins and music do a lot of work here. Anyway, here we also get Chaibing and Xiaoting being chewed out as they are high-ranking Chinese members who didn't do as well as expected. Chaibing gets further chewed out by both other members and herself and is ranked low. Does this foreshadow her downfall later in the season? Maybe. She does get some sympathy through showing her crying and practicing late, but based on how they edited her in the rest of the season, I think Mnet just wanted drama here, and this conveniently also allowed them to have material both for and against her, so they could decide later if they liked her or not. A 50-50 arc that they've set up for many a trainee before and since, such as Ruchi, of course, Ricky and Hui in Boys Planet, and Ji-yoon in Island 2. Anyway, at this point in the series, Chaibing gets praised later, a segment which also shows language issues since Xiaoting has to translate for her. Also, the music does a lot of heavy lifting here. The judges pointing out their condition here is unusual. Condition is something that would massively affect the performances of many a trainee throughout the show, and the judges and producers alike must be aware of this, yet they almost never mention it. Probably because they don't care unless it's to do with trainees they like Yujin. Moving on to the Team 2 performance, even though the vibes seem great, the judges constantly cringing makes it seem bad, although Gia and Dayeon do of course get the expected hype. I don't think Mnet would have minded Gia in the final lineup, although they clearly didn't care about her as much as Youngin. Anyway, we get a bunch of mistakes highlighted at the end of the performance, awkward cheering, and the feedback that the performance was disappointing, especially with criticism for the Chinese trainees, as opposed to Gia and Dayeon, who look super nervous but are complimented. Let's take a look at how they make Dayeon super sympathetic here. Now, Team 1 look great in comparison to Team 2, although we do get a highlight of Xiaoting's mistakes, which causes tension with her CO1 rank. When announcing the winner, Xiaoting is yet another girl who looks like she's in the middle of a mental breakdown, but of course she, our favourite trainee, and Yujin, our favourite protagonist as such, win and cry. Yujin is a relatable and sympathetic character on Girls Planet, and as Everglob once said, she is the angel of the show, and other trainees look good by association with her. I'm starting to repeat myself, you can see how repetitive this show is. Anyway, this episode also showcases Yujin's leadership skills, which are important for her later becoming Kepler's leader, and of course the loss contributes to Dayeon's underdog arc. Then we get to the EBS teams, which of course leads to a dramatic preview of our next episode. And on to episode 4. This episode starts with a teaser for the Eve team. Since they have a lot of top 9 members and thus a lot of expectations, they will be the team that keeps people watching this episode. So then we move on to some actual content with Fiesta team. We get an odd confidence battle and then the rehearsals, where Team 1 barely has anything shown and Team 2 are painted to be really bad, as the filler members. We have issues with Miyu's vocals, coughing before the performance, which paired with tense music feels ominous, and so on. Bahie gets a nice highlight in the actual performance and gets happy looks from the audience and judges. She and Jimin, who did the killing part, are generally considered to have done by far the best job in this team. Bahie also gets a nice highlight of being comforting and sweet, which is good for her character and which is conveniently ignored by her aunties. Team 1's chaotic and excitable intro in the interim checks sets them apart from the other team who look nervous, but their mistakes are highlighted. Even the panel falling apart, which wasn't even their fault. Despite the fact that Team 2 are literally made up of leftover trainees and therefore perfect for an underdog story, they managed to give Team 1 one instead. Especially Mashiro, whose team's performance reflects poorly on her. Jing Chao is especially highlighted as pulling down Yeso and Mashiro, which was probably at least partially to do with a language barrier. But it did remind me how I found it interesting that Yeso picked her to begin with. Anyway, the actual performance is shown to be good, and Yeso and Mashiro are obviously highlighted. Team 1 winning this battle completes their completely undeserved underdog storyline, especially since Team 1 was literally always expected to win. Either way, Mashiro doing a speech in Korean would endear her to Korean fans, and Yeso's cell gets a split-second switch back to being friends, and everyone is happy together with happy music. Wow. Moving on to the 5th season, a song I'd literally never heard of before watching the whole show, but then again I don't really listen to Oh My Girl anyway. The meaningfulness of the match and the tension of the twins being in opposite teams is highlighted, and we get the tension of Team 2 thinking they're way worse than Team 1. Ryan's leadership struggles are highlighted. She is the main character of this matchup, but I'm not sure that they ever wanted her in Kepler. I think she was just good drama for this matchup, and she was someone who would be good for their top 28. She never had the personality or the cell to help her survive to Kepler. Anyway, we of course get a highlight for Bora and the rest of Team 1 with their good vocals. Bora being someone that I think Mnet liked, but not necessarily enough to actively push towards the group. Bora was a second angel on this show, and in comparison to her, Ryan and Team 2 are criticised, although this does seem to kickstart their improvement. After this sudden improvement arc and the criticism of Team 1 not having practiced enough, it becomes clear that unlike many of the other matchups, we aren't clear who will win this one. Moving on to the performances, for Team 2 we get Bora looking nervous, the judges smiling, and the other trainees looking impressed, despite mistakes like Ryan's high note. They get criticism for their confidence and concept of the song, which leads us nicely into Team 1, who seem confident in comparison, and are highlighted through things like Bora's vocals. Sumney looking impressed, the other trainees, especially the popular ones like Urina looking impressed, and the fact that some vocal mistakes were ignored by Mnet just shows how they wanted to use their editing to make this team seem good. This makes their criticism being about vocals surprising. The tense music before announcing the winner is an obvious motif, although the leaders showing solidarity is a nice and somewhat surprising twist. Of course, Team 1 win, but Bora looking shocked makes her seem super humble. Ryan's speech was good, and with her screen time here, I was kind of shocked that she was eliminated, but then again, no one really knew anything about her cellmates. Moving on to the boy groups, we get the contrast of the Eve team looking confident in comparison with the others, which will no doubt lead to them having highlighted mistakes and hubris later on. Even though their confidence chronologically comes after their supposed downfall, the power of editing can make us see things and think that they were super good right from the start. Mic Drop team are highlighted off the bat as terrible, and the other teams look like they're in actual pain with how bad this is, even though Jungmin gets a highlight as a leader. And you know they're doing badly when a mentor personally visits them. Just a rule of thumb on Mnet shows. The performance is, as expected, better than expected from the interim. Although I do think the dramatic camera work, styling, and everyone else looking happy has a big impact on our perception of this. Even their mistakes were ignored. I feel like this performance is an indication of how reaction shots must be mixed and matched between performances, because with the quality of this performance, I just feel that the girls in the audience wouldn't have been as impressed. Anyway, we get the inevitable compliments about how much they improved, and any negative criticism is edited out so they can be happy. As much as I felt this improvement arc was massively staged, I did appreciate how it showed the judge mentors actually, doing their job and mentoring the trainees. Moving on to Pretty You, the stares of the judges make us nervous that they'll be critiqued, despite being so cute and confident. Maya is, of course, highlighted, since she was Mnet's second option for Mnet after Yeso. This girl, Yeonji, who I've never heard of before, also gets a good edit which shows her as selfless, lacking resentment towards others, being skilled, and so on. A lot of that seemed quite staged. As far as the actual performance, of course Maya did great, although I do think she overdid it at times. The group has good energy and the performance is edited well, despite there being some mistakes. However, the lack of audience reaction shots makes this performance seem a little bit empty. Either way, they are of course praised before we move on to the Eve team, who start off strong with the tension with Dayeon's flashback making her seem ungrateful. During their interim check, they get tons of criticism. A lack of control, they're trying too hard, they're a bad team with a bad leader, they're too strong, etc. The weird editing of this segment makes us feel that both Ruchi and Yoo Dayeon are being selfish and obsessed with the role distribution over the actual performance, and it feels like Dayeon is dobbing on others. Suyeon being more diplomatic than Dayeon paints her in a good light, as yet another person that Mnet wanted in at least their final 18. We get the continuation of Dayeon seeming ungrateful as she has moved up several parts and still wants to go higher. This is yet another team that gets the classic Mnet editing of the Japanese contestants being non-existent and generally chill, and the Koreans being made downtrodden by the Chinese contestants, at least in the case of Suyeon. But the happy guitar music as they work on practicing better together means that this segment doesn't become too stressful for what is, at the end of the day, supposed to be a relatively conflict-less show. Believe it or not, we don't want anyone getting murdered on a produce show. Shana being complimented here is great for her, and she stood out in this team, which probably contributed to her going to the finale. As far as the performance itself, it's the usual. The audience looks super impressed, but the judges look critical, which makes us worry and wonder. But of course, we get more Shana highlights. At the end, Dayeon, Yanning, and Ruchi are criticised, and Shana is complimented for the billionth time, along with Suyeon, who is shown to be a good performer. No doubt one of the reasons she was picked with the Planet Pass later on. Cue the tense music before we're told the winner of the battle, which is, as expected, Pretty You. We need to make the competition seem more surprising and closer than it actually was though, so of course all of the teams get compliments which make them seem strong, and the judges act surprised when the result is announced, even though supposedly they literally picked the result. Then we get the announcement that Yes or Yes Team 1 will be performing on M Countdown, which isn't surprising since Mnet clearly like that team and Chaehyun a lot. But I really think Pretty You team deserved it more. Anyway, because we've had that nice moment where Team 1 are happy, we need to change it up. And what better way to do that with the incredibly and obviously tense announcement of the voting period, which comes with a dramatic vote music as all votes do. After that, we get this odd segment where Sunmi and Tiffany tell the trainees to look after themselves, which I guess is nice, but they're on a show which literally destroys their ability to look after themselves and trust themselves on purpose, and which does its best to make them unable to break language barriers. This was supposed to be a nice segment with sweet advice which endears us to both the judges and the trainees, but It just seems hypocritical because anyone with a single brain cell who is even vaguely interested in the creation of these survival shows knows that the show doesn't believe in all of those things, and the judges themselves probably don't either. Ew. I'm not sure if I want Mnet to pretend that everything is okay or to not even try, since the audience should already know that these shows are human rights violating. I think I'd just rather they don't even pretend, since otherwise it makes me feel icky that they're manipulating both young hopeful trainees and the young audiences who watch these shows and may not have the media literacy skills to know what is going on. So on that depressing note, let's go on to episode 5, our first elimination. Of course, we get a dramatic intro with flashbacks and such, since we need to be reminded of all of the drama happening in the last episode, and the drama that was teased for this episode that probably doesn't even actually happen. The cleaning section is of course used to highlight trainees Mnet likes, like Dayeon, Suyeon, Yoojin and Youngin, and the snacks are given fun sound effects, like the trainees probably weren't half-starved for the point of the show. I mean, considering Tammy's recent reveal that a lot of them stress ate on the show, some of them probably were and some of them probably weren't. As always, these fun segments have 3 purposes. 1, to highlight the god himself, Jingu. 2, to highlight trainees Mnet likes. And 3, to create an emotional roller coaster when we go into the eliminations and some of the trainees who were having fun a moment ago almost vomit on stage from stress before getting eliminated. Lovely. This segment with the gifts and letters seems incredibly staged, as we would expect. I don't think they would have actually been able to buy things while at the camp, and there definitely would not be so many tight friendships like those shown. There must have been at least some cells that hated each other's guts. The trainees being stressed about their futures is also rich. Like, Mnet will show this after having been the ones who put them in this situation to begin with, and made it more stressful than it needs to be. Moving on to the elimination. Please just assume for the rest of this episode that I am mentioning over and over and over every 5 seconds that there's dramatic music and lighting for each elimination and pauses between announcements to draw it out. This episode also made me wonder how many people on the show got COVID and how that affected their performances, and also how many of the people like Dayeon, who left for personal reasons, left or did poorly because of COVID. I also felt that the mic packs they wear must be uncomfortable to sit on. Pre-eliminations, let me say that Jingu gets his usual enthusiastic applause because even sadness can't make the girls hate Jingu, and Youngin's cell gets highlighted because Mnet wants all 3 members of that cell in Kepler, and also Bahie looks really pretty here for literally no reason. The showing of cell and individual rankings during each elimination episode of Girls Planet was a really interesting choice. It helped both the audience and the trainees feel super stressed, since the trainees are clearly all thinking about their past ranks, and it allows upsets as some people will rank both higher and lower than last time. This is the same reason Mnet likes to get Jingu to say things like, "Oh, the next cell performed this song," because by narrowing the potential cells to 2 options, they can make both the audience and the trainees stressed. How nice, classic Mnet stuff. Anyway, starting from second last, as we always do for Mnet, cell 16 is Bora's cell, cell 15 is Jungmin's cell, and cell 14 is Hyeon's cell. These cells help demonstrate the importance of the voting benefit. Also, notice how the most salient trainee, or sometimes the only trainee that I, the average audience member, knows in these cells, becomes the name of this cell, and is also usually the Korean trainee, showing yet again how the Korean trainees get the greater highlight and more stories on average. Anyway, this segment also lets them capitalize off the stress of the twins potentially being separated, which somewhat foreshadows the fact that one won't survive, but which also shows the emotional nature of the eliminations for both the twins and for many other pairs of trainees who want to go through together. This makes the audience care more about them, and thus, if they make it through this elimination, we'll be more likely to vote for them in the future. Anyway, cell 13 is Rivika's cell, cell 12 is Jiwon's, and cell 11 is Maya's. These cells are all middle of the road, so they're run through pretty quickly, and this faster pace, as well as the trainees obviously speculating over who will be called next, gets us speculating too. And of course, Maya gets another highlight and appeal to the Planet Guardians, while shots of the audience supporting the girls who got called shows that the potentially eliminated people support those on stage, even if they may get eliminated because of them. This is very important for the image of maintaining peace between everyone. Cell 10 is Dayeon's cell, Cell 9 is Dayeon's cell, expected since she wouldn't likely be able to go higher at this point in her storyline. And then, because we only have the exciting top 9 cells left, we get a mood break into the fashion week. But of course, not before the endless reprisal of the joke of Sunway saying that Jingu was ugly. As with most filler segments, the fashion week is used to make the audience laugh and to highlight trainees. Most of the people who are highlighted or given reaction shots here are Mnet's favourites, although some trainees do get to slip through the cracks if they do something outlandish enough, only for them to never again gain any screen time. So my highlights from this segment is that I loved Dayeon saying freedom, and that some trainees who got highlights here for various reasons were Samamo, Xinyu, Jongmin and Wonjae for her duality. The literal only person I know on that list is Wonjae, and that says something about how the rest of these girls were edited for the rest of the show. Cue a little more silly stuff and a little Rurika highlight before we get a sudden mood shift back to the eliminations, a shift which, as I've said before, Mnet is fond of, and which gives the audience whiplash, which helps to make us feel even more emotional. Anyway, Cell 8 is Yunning's cell, who managed to get higher than I expected with Yunning's evil edit, although to be fair, Suyeon could have brought her up. Cell 7 is Bahie's cell, and everyone seems happy with her survival. I wouldn't feel the need to mention this, but some aunties seem to think that everyone on Girls Planet hated her, which there is literally no evidence of. Cell 6 belongs to my queen Dayeon, and I thought there was a great split in the speeches between these three cells. Dayeon thanked the masters and the other girls, Suyeon thanked the other girls, and Bahie thanked the audience. They have all aspects of the show covered. The highlight here of Bahie saying thank you to her cellmates continued my conspiracy theory that Mnet actually didn't mind if Bahie made it into Kepler. She got some nice highlights and was only ever shown in a positive light and as a hard worker. They must at the very least have been okay with her, probably like a Jiwoong or Jongwoo on Boys Planet. The way I see it, two things probably happened. First, Mnet probably didn't mind if Bahie made it into Kepler, since they knew that they would be able to milk her surname no matter what happened or what she wanted. Second, I think Bahie played Girls Planet very smart and kept quiet and inoffensive, as I've already mentioned, giving Mnet literally zero material they could possibly use to edit her poorly. She made zero mistakes, had zero failures, and didn't say anything that could be even vaguely considered offensive. So even if they didn't want her in the group and wanted to edit her out, they wouldn't really be able to. Next, we move on to the top 5 cells, where Jingu is starting to lay it on thick. How glorious these cells are, how tense everything is, how hard the competition is, etc. Cell 5 is Chaehyun's cell, Cell 4 is Yeso's cell, and at this point we get to the point where these people could be in the top 9, and thus we get more anxiety. So with that in mind, Cell 3 is Hikaru's, which highlights Chaehyun and Mashiro, and a mandatory second fun video break, since first and second are dramatic positions. This lets Mnet highlight Bora, Yurina, Xiaoting, Maya, Wonjae and Ruchi, and a few other people like Jiwon, Yali and Dayeon. I also thought it was very cute seeing Bora speak to Yurina in Japanese, although this did sadly highlight the language barriers yet again. With that, we finally get to move on to the top cells, Cell 1 being Yujin's cell and Cell 2 being Youngin's, which gives us a nice chance to highlight Youngin and Jia, reminding the audience that Jia exists. And if we're looking for friendships here, the Youngin-Jia one is one that we should be invested in, and thus Jia is someone we should be rooting for. Then we move down to Cell 17, with the candidates being Jia's cell and Wonjae's cell, both of which have legitimate reasons to continue through and which would cause a lot of drama by getting eliminated. Either would have been a dramatic option, but we can imagine that most people in the audience would have wanted Jia's cell, who did, thankfully, eventually win. Not only did Jia's cell have Jia and thus a connection with Youngin, but Wonjae's cell had Seiyin, who, in a twist of fate and also seemingly karma as implied by the show, gets eliminated in the first round. Wonjae gets lots of screen time here, which really helps to build into her getting the planet pass. It's very lucky for the editors that it was Wonjae's birthday, since that lets them fit in more drama. But also it's lucky for Wonjae, because although I imagine this wouldn't have had a huge effect, I do wonder how much the knowledge that it would be her birthday affected the judges, since editing the segment as a birthday gift was a stroke of brilliance. Fun fact, the fact that the elimination was filmed on her birthday means this is one of the few episodes of a survival show where we know for certain the exact date it was filmed on. In this case, this episode was filmed on August 28th, 2021, which would have been Wonjae's 24th birthday. Anyway, this was a great highlight for Wonjae, who ended up going all the way to the finale. The other two Planet Pass girls are Ruan from J Group and Hyerim from K Group, who gets the highlight of vocals, leadership, and Chaehyun crying. Everyone looks super tired, and they definitely were. Not only would they have been filming this for literal hours, but they also would have been exhausted from being so nervous in the days leading up to it. I also think it was super cruel to make all of the eliminated trainees just sit there while they announced the top 9. Those people probably wanted to skedaddle and go home and cry, but they had to sit there and watch people be more successful than them. Anyway, the top 9 was chosen as the trainees who had the highest individual votes, explaining why during that voting period we voted for both individual trainees and cells, not just cells. These votes honestly probably helped the masters pick the planet passes too. The interesting thing about the top 9 is that even though being in the top 9 earlier in the show doesn't necessarily guarantee your debut, even though the show acts like it does definitely increase your chances. Being in the top 9 increases your screen time and increases your chance of having more screen time in the future, and that most of the time directly increases your number of votes and makes you more likely to stay in the top 9 in the future and in the finale. You can see this by looking at who was in the top 9 over the course of the show. Note that there were very few changes outside of some ranks changing. The only really big difference is when we move to the one-pick system, which we know always has a big change in who goes up and who goes down, but outside of the one-pick system, the ranks are relatively stable over the course of the show. Anyway, rank 9 is Chaehyun, which shows the start of her rise to fame. Rank 8 is Yeso, and rank 7 is Chaibing, who with her edit was probably there because of her associations with trainees like Yujin and Mei, and because of her skills which had been shown. Rank 6 is Richie, rank 5 is Mashiro, and we go into our top candidates. This is yet another example of Bahie playing it safe. She doesn't believe that she's a top 4 candidate, and this is good for her because it shows her humbleness and also means that she doesn't get her hopes up when she doesn't get in. Our candidates, relatively unsurprisingly, end up being Yujin, Yurina, Xiaoting, and Hikaru, which gives us a chance to start off the Xiaorina arc with them congratulating each other. What does get to be surprising about this lineup of candidates is that Yujin, a fan favourite, is 4th. Hence the iconic Bahie shot of her telling the other girls to congratulate Yujin, even if they're shocked with how low she ranked. Rank 3 is Hikaru, who gets a highlight for being cute, and Jingu does his best to drag out the rank 1 and 2 announcement. But in the end, after a lot of Xiaorina editing, rank 2 is Xiaoting and rank 1 is Yurina, starting her dominance and eventual downfall. Yurina is very cute here, and this, as well as being in a cell with top 9 candidates, is probably what got her such a high rank. I'm genuinely surprised she didn't make it into Kepler with this editing, but in hindsight we all know it's because people panic voted for Xiaoting, and everyone was surprised she didn't make it in. And as sad as it is that Yurina didn't get into Kepler, it would have been an absolute sin if Xiaoting didn't make it. And in the end, oddly enough, Yurina saved many more people by not making it into Kepler than she would have if she did get in. She directly influenced the popularity and thus careers of Zhang Hao, Matthew, and Keita on Boys Planet, and influenced many of the girls and how they were perceived on Island 2. Her case has become so well known that people use her name as a verb, saying that someone was urinated on a show, or as an adjective saying that someone is the uriner of a season. And that's a pretty big impact, and probably an even larger one than she would have had in Kepler. Both Yurina and Xiaoting have good speeches, and Xiaoting's choice to speak part of hers in Korean is a very good choice. Again, it appeals her to the Korean-biased Planet Guardians. Hence, we get some inspirational music as they take their seats, and the I want to survive mentality for the next round, which leads us nicely into the next episode. You may notice that I start to have less and less to say specifically about each of these episodes as we go through, and that definitely isn't because there's no editing going on. On the contrary, there is tons and tons of editing. But a lot of my notes are very repetitive. It's all Mnet mixing and matching scenes using zooms, sound effects, lighting and music to make people seem either good or bad, and otherwise to create stories where they didn't really exist before. So, as with the eliminations, just imagine me saying the same things over and over and over as I discuss this. Almost every single scene of this show has weird zooms and music, which is supposed to emotionally manipulate the audience one way or another, and it gets very boring and exhausting to discuss everything in detail. For more detail, you can read my notes on the episodes, which aren't much more than what I'm discussing here, or I can recommend you re-watch each episode, or parts of each episode, and focus on the editing and the meaning it creates. Media literacy and analysis. How I love you. Moving on to the actual episode, we get our usual dramatic intro, which here highlights Yurina's upcoming tensions between her high rank and her actual skill level. We start off strong with the announcement of the second mission, dramatic as always. Here we get more aggressive Jingu praise, and also the extremely dramatic announcement of the disbandment of the cells. RIP. They only lasted 3 episodes. The random highlighting of one girl with a low rank when Jingu announces that there will now be individual votes by country was kind of funny. I also found it interesting that Dayeon said she knew this was going to happen, because lots of people both on the show and in the audience seemed to have zero ability to predict this outcome. So good on her for using her brain, and also getting more screen time in the process. Interestingly, my conspiracy theory of Bahie being fine in Mnet's eyes is continued, as she gets tons of reaction shots. Mind you, that could just be for clout. Alright, the songs, which, be aware, are all announced with appropriately, inappropriately inflated brilliance and awe, and with all the girls reacting in shock and amazement for each one. I haven't heard of about half of these songs, although if there is one thing I can appreciate about these survival shows, it's that they introduce me to new songs and artists that I can start to like through the performances. I really liked Girls Planet's system where the harder the mission you choose, the greater the risk, but also higher the potential benefit. I thought this was a really interesting way to show how trainees would think differently, and it also gave some people the chance to do much better than they would have otherwise done. I can't think of any specific examples, but I have no doubt there would have been some people who survived only because they got the benefit, or vice versa. And, for instance, Suyeon doing a 3-person song gave her a huge highlight, but was also a big risk as she had strong competition. In the end, she didn't make the cut, possibly because of the lack of a benefit. However, her being a third of a performance as opposed to 1/6 or 1/9 got her a huge highlight for the fans, and thus lots of fans who would vote for her, and it let her show off her skills, both of which would have led to the judges picking her for the Planet Pass. Interesting to think about. Anyway, I was talking about the songs. For the 3-person songs, we have My House for vocals, VVS for rap, We Are for rap, All About You for vocals, Mafia in the Morning for vocals, and No Excuses for dance. I can definitely agree with the trainees that this was an interesting combination. For the 6-member groups, we have Missing You by B2B for rap and vocal, My C by IU for vocal, and Fate by Lee Sunhee for dance. For the 9-member groups, we have Ice Cream by Blackpink for dance and Salute by Little Mix also for dance. Hence we get Dayeon being excited for Salute, which is interesting and also kind of ironic since she ended up with Ice Cream, which gave her one of the best edits in any episode of the show. I also find it both hilarious and horrifying that Jingu gets to smile so much, even though he definitely knows that he's creating lots of stress. Which cells separated and which didn't is interesting here. Whenever I watch this scene, I'll be reminded of Everglowup's comment that this was the moment when Chaibing separated herself from Yujin, the angel of the show, and thus which allowed her evil edit and eventual downfall. And although I have some disagreements with this, I can definitely see where she's coming from. Speaking of Yujin, I thought it was nice that she got a highlight for having too many choices, a funny but good situation to be in. Youngin gets a highlight of trying something new with My House, and Yurina and Xiaoting get a highlight and a cute friendship edit, while Yeso gets screen time for picking Fate, which is quickly becoming the Avengers team. Chaehyun, however, gets to be the saviour for My C team, which Ziyin also joins, and Wonjae gets even more screen time about being anxious and being unable to pick a vocal unit. I always find it kind of crazy that people freak out so much on these survival shows when elimination numbers are announced. I mean, a lot of them have watched survival shows. Surely they know that the numbers get cut in half each time, or at least they can use their common sense to figure it out. So why are they so surprised? Is it staged and scripted? Are they acting it up for the camera to try and get more screen time? Do they just get so tired that they forget their common sense and are genuinely surprised? I don't know, but it is a weird phenomenon. Hence, we get the usual quick run-through of every team before they get into a more fleshed out storyline before their performance. VVS team have lots of language barriers, and Zhao gets an incompetent edit, which was not good for her to say the least, even though her confusion with the song and later constantly asking to go to the bathroom was a combination of language barriers and illness. We Are team gets Bora looking very nervous, as do the rest of the team, who also, as always, have language barriers. Mafia in the morning team have the odd evil editing return of Yanning, kind of, with a gulp sound to make us think that Mashiro, our sweetie, is scared of her. Mashiro starts off her typical ways of being a good leader, and tons of highlights, although we do of course get the expected language barrier issues. No Excuses team have the duality of Hikaru and Suyeon being high level and skilled, while Zagoi is highlighted as a random and incompetent person who makes the others flustered. Suyeon gets a good delegation and leader edit, which is good for her, especially in relation to Zagoi being shown to make the others nervous with her lack of skills. All About You team has Yeyoung, who is highlighted, but some setbacks with their concept criticisms, which further highlight Yeyoung as we can see that she can take criticism well. My House gets a highlight and backstory for Yale, who has a terrible hairstyle that doesn't flatter her the entire show for some reason. And they, again, have language barriers and a few concerns, as Youngin is being highlighted as stepping up, which shows her as skilled in comparison to Yale seeing incompetent and arrogant. Fate team are a contrast from this. They're all super happy with their team, and Yujin is being goofy as usual. Them being highlighted as an Avengers team means they'll probably get chewed out in the interims, knowing Mnet. We get some great highlights here. Mostly for Yeso's cute maknae energy, which really pushes her towards being the debut maknae, Yujin's empathy and leadership skills, and Ruchi for her camera performance skills. But of course the subtitles ask how their fate will turn out, which obviously makes the audience anxious and hanging on for the next episode. Missing You team is all about Yurina. She is pretty carefree and rank 1, but she is also uncertain and lacking confidence, and needs to grow as rank 1. The power of Mnet's editing is insane. They literally managed to give the rank 1 girl an underdog arc, despite her being mega skilled, mega popular, and literally rank 1. I mean, it's a great storyline for her, and I am of course again shocked she didn't make it into Kepler, but it's kind of funny how she was portrayed as the underdog. The editing giving us tense music and sound effects do a lot to make us anxious that she won't be able to live up to the rank 1 seat, which is constantly shown through flashbacks as it literally hangs as a weight over her shoulders. She also gets to show her good personality as she selflessly gives up her part. My C team gets a highlight for Ji-yoon, who has a powerful voice. I don't know who she is though, so I assume she doesn't make it through the next eliminations. Shana subsequently gets a sad and stressful edit. She was definitely one of Mnet's runner-up vocalists after people like Chaehyun, Youngin, Yurina and Bora. Anyway, this team also has my queen Ziyin, and Chaehyun gets a highlight for being encouraging. Salute team have a leadership battle with Chaibing initially winning, but this is the beginning of her evil edit and downfall, as there is tense music when people say she is good, which makes her seem overly confident and arrogant, rather than humble and selfless. In contrast, Ice Cream team are in absolute awe of Dayeon. Dayeon taking over the whole team could be seen as her being overbearing and commanding, but by including bright music and the other trainees feeling bad about having her take over everything, Mnet spins this in a positive light. If this scene had tense music and/or someone looking upset and disappointed, this would look really bad for Dayeon, but of course it doesn't because Mnet and all of her teammates love her. And realistically, yeah, this wasn't amazing leadership. Dayeon did almost all of the work and micromanaged everything, and she ended up making half of the girls just randomly stand there and smile while she did her solo dance break. Dayeon's choreography almost entirely highlighted Dayeon and her strengths, and it was weirdly sexual for such a young group. And yet all she gets is praise for it, from both the judges and the fans. I'm not saying anyone should hate on Dayeon for this, because she did the smart thing by tailoring the performance to her and making herself look good, and her rank obviously rose because of it, but this doesn't make the choreography and leadership anywhere near as amazing as the show portrays it to be. But Dayeon does need her growth arc, and what better way to get that arc than showing literally every skill she has, in comparison to less skilled trainees, no matter how good or bad Dayeon's skills actually are in reality. Oh dear, Mnet. So, with those quick visits to each team, let's move on to the performance day, which has our typical dramatic music, the masters being stressed, which in turn makes us even more stressed, and the girls being excited for Jingu. Honestly, even though I was completely neutral to him at the start of the show, the girls getting so excited for him every single time has made me excited for him too. The power of editing and social psychology, I guess. Even though it was almost certainly scripted for them to cheer for him each time. I actually really hate that they brought in Wonjae for this stage. Him being there puts so much more pressure on We Are teams since they have to stress about performing in front of him, and this is a stress that isn't put on any of the other trainees, which just makes it seem extra cruel. It's also really weird how his tattoos are kind of covered but kind of not. Like, were they meant to be covered or not? Looking at other footage, it seems like he has them kind of covered on a regular basis, so maybe that's just his style or what he's into on Korean shows. However, on the bright side, it seems like We Are team have already met Wonjae in rehearsals, which means they're probably marginally less nervous than they would have been if this was the first time they performed in front of him. Anyway, time for a flashback before the performance. Fun fact, I don't think I've ever mentioned this. Mnet puts these flashback sections right before the performance as opposed to at the start of the episode or in a previous episode to show the whole story of the group at once, so that any evil or angel edits that Mnet makes are fresh in our minds. This also means that we can see the, to us, instant improvement that many of these teams end up having, even though that improvement wasn't actually instant but was over a week or so. I mean, we know that Mnet only gives the teams a day or so to practice before the interim checks, and then they get the rest of the week to improve. So it's no wonder that many of the interims are kind of trash, and so many of the performances are so much better in comparison. Anyway, during the practice and interims, we get some tense music and some swish zoom sound effects, which make us worried, which is probably just to get us in the same mindset as the trainees so that when they are praised, we feel even happier. And they are praised. Manami especially gets to overcome her stress with the judges' praise. She gets a nice Mnet edit, and Bora yet again gets an angel edit, or basically just including her naturally angelic moments that make her seem like the best person to ever exist, which she might well be. We then get the inspiring music, them saying they love each other, the slow-mo flashbacks showing how hard they worked, and so on. The performance is edited in a great way, with lots of the other trainees looking nervous, and although it wasn't edited like it was the best thing ever, it was still edited in a pretty positive light. Anyway, onto the feedback. We get lots of happy music and praise for Manami especially, but also for the other members, and they are highlighted as a great team with a fun, nice hug and their diligence of cleaning up the stage. This cleaning of the stage and the feedback that they are having fun on stage is also great for them. It shows that they have the essential humble idol attitude, and that they also have the essential idol love of performing. And it's no doubt one of the reasons I like them because all of my biases love performing. Interestingly, Bora and Wonjae made it to my top 9 and Manami was on my honourable mentions list, so that says something about all 3 girls and about their editing in this segment, which really did endear them to me. Am I falling for Mnet's editing? Maybe? But who doesn't think that Bora is an angel inside and outside of Girls Planet? Right, moving on to Ice Cream Team. This team has a lot of very nervous people, especially people like Ran, who got the planet pass and thus is understandably losing confidence. The whole point of this team and their edit is that they are all working hard together and getting along well, in contrast to Salute Team, their rivals who have leadership problems. This is almost entirely done through the editing. While Dayeon gets edits where her team members, including well-known trainees like Bahie, praise her and her skills endlessly, Chaibing gets dramatic zooms and sound effects whenever she says something. Even when Dayeon says something humble and Chaibing says something that is also humble, they get edited differently, which shows them, of course, in a different light. In this team, Ran gets a lacking confidence edit, and although it might seem like they want her in the group because of this, I think that although Mnet was slightly positive towards her, the main purpose of her edit was to prop Dayeon up, as was everything in this segment, including the evil edit of Chaibing. Dayeon can literally do no wrong in this segment. She co-opts the entire leadership of the team and the editing says she's being helpful to her stressed teammates. She makes a choreography where she's almost entirely the centre, and which has members of her team awkwardly posing on the sidelines for an awkwardly long period of time, and she's praised for making the whole choreography. She does the bare minimum and gives each other member of her team one singular line. I mean, just look at the line distribution for this performance. She gets more than double the lines of the next highest member, and she gets 4 times the number of lines that Nensu gets, and she has almost more lines than the next 3 members combined. This isn't even including the extra center time she gets in the dance break, and yet she's still praised for all of this. The judges say that she was very nice to give all of the other members a chance to shine. This is insane favoritism. Chaibing is the center of Salute and gets criticized for taking over the performance, but even in the interim, Chaibing didn't have the same amount of center time that Dayeon had. Dayeon took over the performance far more than Chaibing did, but while Chaibing gets criticized, probably because she's Chinese and Mnet is xenophobic, Dayeon gets praised because she's a Korean trainee who Mnet wants in the group. This is insane. I had never seen the full ice cream performance before, but I was shocked with how much center time Dayeon got, so I'm not surprised that people were upset with this. There are many things I disagree with Everglow Up on, and I know she is a controversial figure, and I also believe in anti-Dayeon OT8 Keplian, but she once said that what Dayeon showed here wasn't leadership, how the show portrayed it to be, but instead was co-opting the team and doing everything herself because she didn't believe that anyone else was as good as her. And yeah, I love Dayeon, but for the most part, I have to agree with Everglow Up here. There were tons of teams where some members were less skilled than others. Since it's fresh in our minds, we can instantly think about We Are Team, where Manami struggled a lot with her lack of Korean knowledge. But in We Are Team, her teammates still made an effort to include her ideas and encourage her. And while Dayeon was encouraging, it was more about her teammates' performance skills than their performance ideas. And even then, she still did everything herself. The editing painted her as the best leader to ever exist, who made life super easy for her teammates. But at the end of the day, Dayeon didn't show very good leadership skills, seemed selfish with her extreme center time, and probably made life too hard for herself. By taking all of the work and micromanaging everything, she was probably far more stressed than many of her teammates whose work she took. And although this may seem like good leadership on the surface, it actually reflects poor leadership in that she was unable to inspire her team to create ideas together, and she was unable to effectively delegate tasks. A lot of people watching Girls Planet may have wondered why Dayeon wasn't made the leader of Kepler, and this is probably why. She was Mnet's favourite, so they had to edit everything she did in a great way to get her lots of votes and make her seem more skilled than she actually is. But she didn't actually have the skills to be a leader, so she couldn't actually become Kepler's leader. And on top of all of that, the dance she created from ice cream, like I said, was weirdly sexy at points, which sure suits the song, but it's horrifying when you consider the age of the contestants in the group, as most of them, and even Dayeon herself I believe, were underage. And after all of that, I genuinely think this dance, especially the dance break, was actually just kind of mediocre and awkward at times. Sorry, this just makes me insanely angry. Not only did Mnet do Dayeon dirty here by making her seem more skilled than she was and by praising her for poor leadership, but they also evil edited Chaibing for what seems like no reason other than xenophobia. And on top of all of that, there is the extreme emotional manipulation of Dayeon in How You Like That, and OMG, there's just no winners here. Chaibing gets evil edited, the ice cream team gets no screen time outside of Dayeon and Ran, who exists to pop up Dayeon's storyline. Dayeon gets to be super stressed and is manipulated by the producers and gets a whole bunch of haters because of it. It's really sad. So yeah, ice cream is Dayeon's story. Let me run you through it. May as well, since I've complained about it so much already. Dayeon gets to be the most skilled person in this team, and she's a humble leader. She is directly contrasted with Chaibing, who is painted as being confident to the point of arrogance. The masters praise all members of Dayeon's team, including OT8s, people like Bahie, but Dayeon, of course, gets the most praise. The judges explicitly mention her being kind enough to give the other members a chance to shine, which makes Dayeon seem even more humble. Ran gets minimal criticism, being told to improve her energy and being negatively compared to Dayeon, but in her fragile emotional state after the planet pass, she's devastated by this. Dayeon helps her regain her confidence, which makes Ran a sympathetic figure, but is far better for Dayeon, who is shown to be skilled but also selfless, and it seems that she has the grace and kindness to help a lowly soul like Ran. I kid you not, that is the impression I got from the editing of this segment. It's not edited like Dayeon's doing the bare minimum of being nice to her teammate to try and create a better group performance. It's edited like Dayeon is a god of performance who has humbly descended from her throne to humbly and selflessly help a poor mortal. Humbly. Yep, this goes on for 5 minutes straight. Before the performance, the judges hope that Dayeon's hard work will pay off. Not the team's hard work, not Ran's hard work, Dayeon's hard work, like the rest of the team are dragging her down. The actual performance has Dayeon's dance break being repeated multiple times with lots and lots of reactions and compliments. She gets a standing ovation, and the praise that Bahie and Ran get is pushed to the side in comparison to Dayeon. The feedback for this performance is entirely positive, making it seem like the best thing ever, and although Ran does get some praise, Dayeon is literally showered with compliments, and when she gets emotional after being praised after what was probably a lot of stress, she's painted as even more humble and kind. This whole ice cream segment also includes lots and lots and lots of Bahie praising Dayeon. This is a tactic that Mnet uses a lot, where they use more experienced or well-known trainees to prop up others they like, or even tear them down. Bahie is well known and her fans hang on to every word she says. Thus, when she praises Dayeon and Mnet shows that more people are more likely to think that Dayeon is amazing and thus to vote for her. Don't get me wrong, Dayeon is amazing, but she's nowhere near as amazing as the show portrayed her to be. So with that segment full of editing so blatant it makes me disgusted, let's move on to a less rage-inducing team, No Excuses. Although they get a cute intro, Mnet does what they do best, with a sudden emotional switch-up with the flashback and tense music. In practice, Hikaru and Dayeon bouncing off each other's personalities and skills makes them look both enthusiastic and appreciative of each other's talents, but Dayeon's nervousness also leads us into criticism of their attitudes. I found it interesting that Hikaru was criticised for her lack of versatility, since she was clearly wanted in the final lineup. However, this comment, combined with the praise she receives after the performance, could easily lead to potential fans seeing her as someone who takes feedback well and improves well, which is a really good look for her. Interestingly, there's this shot which uses tense music and lighting to visually highlight Hikaru's tears, and thus frustration, which I found interesting. It's a classic thing for Mnet to do. to edit the center of the show in such a way that they get an underdog arc somehow, usually because they're skilled but not skilled enough, despite still being the best, of course. Dayeon was manipulated and forced to work her way up from the bottom through no fault of her own. Xiaoting was told she didn't have enough impact and was highlighted making mistakes, and Hikaru isn't versatile enough. There's also this interesting segment where Suyeon is shown as being the saviour of this group through using her iPad to help them. This was very odd. Is this a product placement moment? Suyeon also gets a big confidence highlight and underdog arc in these rehearsals. This would have made her sympathetic and would have helped her get votes. It's pretty clear that Mnet at the very least liked her, so they would have wanted her in the next round. Hence why she got the Planet Pass. She even gets highlighted here as a strong contestant, and the judges wonder why she lacks so much confidence. This editing also reflects the amount that Mnet wanted each of these girls in the group. They want Hikaru, but hey, she's also pretty solid in votes, so she gets a bit of a highlight, but not too much. They want Suyeon to go through, and she's less popular, so she gets the bulk of screen time. And they couldn't care less about Zagoi, so she gets an evil edit, to the point that I didn't even know her name and just called her Pink Hair Girl in my notes. I had to look up her name for this video. Anyway, onto the performance, which is very typical, in that Suyeon's acting gets highlighted, the audience looks super impressed, they get to lip sync for some reason, Suyeon looks pretty, and since we have to see this as a competent performance, the few mistakes they make aren't highlighted. Of course, Suyeon succeeds with the move she messed up during rehearsals, since she needs to get that good arc. The good thing here about Mnet not having an audience for Girls Planet is that if Suyeon had made a mistake, they probably would have just shot it again until she got it right. Or they would have done something else, like removed that shot from the performance or removed the mistake in rehearsals, so they could instead get a sob story about how she'd made a mistake in a fit of nervousness. Of course, the judges say that they're the pride of the show, but the camera only shows Suyeon and Hikaru. Rip Zagoi. Hikaru praising Suyeon in the evaluation is also a great endorsement for Suyeon. She is well liked and respected by the centre of J Group. Our next performance is Missing You. Speaking of unexpected underdog arcs, this group has the current rank 1, Urina, who is of course the main character in this performance and who gets the aforementioned underdog arc. If you remember back to when we were first introduced to this team, she was criticised as not being good enough for rank 1. You know, to be rank 1 you need to be outstanding, and she was just really good. So we start off this flashback with sad music and the criticism she received earlier. An important thing to note here is that this is sad music, not tense music. Mnet doesn't want us to think she's trash, which is the usual implication of tense music. Instead, they want us to think she's lacking confidence, hence the sad music. In the practice scenes, she's paired with victorious music, since she is, of course, rank 1. We get the judges looking serious though, and with the subtitles pointing out mistakes and all, it looks bad. So, Urina gets criticised heavily, especially with the judges just repeating, "This is bad." She gets the dramatic music, lots of shots of her nervous face, gets to be told that she's bringing the team down, and we get to see her fellow top 9s, and especially Xiaoting, looking nervous for her, which highlights her friendship with them and also the tense nature of the situation. Hence, we get her crying, an obvious reaction to this situation, and which helps her underdog storyline, and which impresses upon us her anxiety of not being able to go up. She can only go down. I do like how the mentors actually mentor here, and after all of this we get the encouragement of the other members, to show that she's amazing and everyone looks up to her, and the uplifting music to show how she's becoming a better person and increasing her confidence. Literally everyone else in this team, as far as this edit is concerned, only exist to lift up Urina, who is already rank 1. Of course, the performance is much better than the interim. However, a lot of it seemed very similar to me. I think a lot of what makes it good is just the judges and other trainees giving positive comments now, not negative ones, of course. This performance is apparently so good that Yeso almost cries, although goodness knows if that footage was taken from another performance. And of course they get praised a lot, mostly Urina, who is praised by the judges and the other members of her team, and who gets an inner monologue talking about how much better she feels. Yet again we get a mention of language barriers, yet language barriers aren't taken into account in the judges' evaluations. Classic Mnet. As I predicted in my notes, the lack of a storyline for the other members of this team meant that Yurina was the only one who survived the eliminations, with the exception of Jinyu, who was the rapper in this team and also got a small highlight and story. Now we are almost at the end of this episode, and what better for Mnet to do than to tease the performance of the one person who tons of people are watching the show for, Yujin, and also by coincidence, lots of the other top 9 members who chose Fate. Hence, we get the judges teasing us that they're nervous for some reason, which makes us curious about why. They get slammed in their interims, especially Yeso, kickstarting yet another semi-underdog arc. Yeso is the main character of this team. Everyone else is either unimportant or have had arcs recently or will be likely to survive anyway, like Yujin and Zhaoting. So this is Yeso's time to shine, and shine she did, both under her own power and with the editing. But of course, showing the whole performance now would take away from the excitement and from Mnet's watch hours, so now we get to the end of the episode with a looming question. Can Yeso do it? Knowing these shows, of course she can, but people will still be worried for this young girl and would want to see how she does, hence they would tune in for the next episode to see. Now let me show you all of the shenanigans in the next episode preview and in the rankings. The important thing to note here is that Dayeon is specifically shown to be 9th in the K-group rankings. This means that she is below the cutoff to get eliminated. And this baffles me so much. I had heard from other people that Dayeon wouldn't have got into Kepler if it wasn't for Mnet's favoritism, and I believed it, but I never knew it was this egregious. This is insane. If Mnet hadn't revealed these numbers, there probably wouldn't have been much of a change in voting, and it's very likely that Dayeon would have been eliminated in the second round. But because these images were shown, Dayeon was able to get votes and survive, which allowed Mnet to edit her even better, and allowed her to get into the group. Insane levels of riggery and favoritism here. I know people complain about Shoot Team going to Dayeon's house, but I genuinely think that this is so much worse than that. This is probably the worst thing that Mnet did. Because Dayeon's mum being on the show was just deeply cringy, but this was active riggery. OMG. Mnet favoritism strikes again. Dayeon was definitely talented and skilled enough to make it into Kepler, but the fact that there was so much rigged in her favour makes her seem less deserving to many fans and non-fans alike. Hence the OT8 anti-Dayeon hate train. It's so sad because the hate goes to Dayeon, not to Mnet, who are the ones who actually deserve it. Anyway, on another note, if Dayeon had been eliminated here, it would have been really interesting to see if they still included the segment with her mum in the next mission. Would it have been like a sad send-off to a trainee who was eliminated? Would it be teasing a jellyfish girl group? Or perhaps Mnet just wouldn't have included it. That said, Dayeon probably wouldn't have actually been eliminated, they would have used the planet pass on her, so I guess this is pointless speculation. But actually I do have one more thing to say, to Doa stans. A lot of Doa stans, mostly the anti-Bahie OT8s and the obsessive Doa stans, but Doa stans nonetheless, seem to think that Bahie, in her horrible nepotism ways, pushed Doa unfairly out of the competition, and that, more importantly, if Doa had made it through to the second round, she would have made it all the way to Kepler and would potentially have even been the centre of the group. The most well-known proponent of this theory is the Kepler OT8 mod Irene promoter. However, I have asked the Girls Planet 999 Reddit, a group of people who watched the show when it aired and thus could give a bit more insight about the atmosphere and mood towards Doa at the time. And a lot of them said she would have had a decent chance of making the debut lineup, but almost no one thought she had any chance of being rank 1, especially not against the huge showing of support that Dayeon eventually had. And even then, a lot of people thought that she just didn't get enough screen time and enough of a highlight to get enough votes to continue through. So I'll talk more about Doa when we get to the episode 8 eliminations, but the point of all of this was that Dayeon moving up in the ranks would have pushed someone out, and that someone, based on the information we have, would most likely be Doa. So I'm not saying you should blame someone, because you shouldn't blame anyone. The trainees weren't in charge of either the producers or the audience, but if you were to blame someone for pushing Doa out, it ought to be Dayeon, not Bahie. Of course, yet again, let me say that the real culprits are Mnet as always. Now let's look at the other people whose ranks were revealed. I'm not entirely sure why they would reveal Sunway's. Is it because she was a comedy character they wanted to keep a bit longer? They did seem to like her, but not enough to be in the debut group. Alternatively, there could have been someone they really didn't want in the top 8, so they might have tried to push that person out by revealing this. If that was the case, I think the person they wanted to get rid of might have been Chaibing or potentially Zhao, since they didn't like either one. I'm unsure about Kotone. They liked her a bit, but not a lot. My only guess would be that they included someone from all 3 groups to avoid it looking like they were favouring Dayeon too much, since they showed all 3 rank 9s, not just Dayeon. She ended up making it through this elimination, so I hope that's what Mnet wanted, because it's what they get for showing her like this. And with that, this script has become quite long. This video will probably be at least 3 hours with all of the clips I'm including, so since we're nicely at the end of episode 6 and thus halfway through the show, let me split this in 2. Part 2 should be up shortly after this part, and in that I'll discuss the other 6 episodes and the main storylines of the show. So for now, let's summarize this episode. Girls Planet 999 was an Mnet survival show, the pseudo 5th season of Produce 101, which eventually created the girl group Kepler. The show was universally criticised for its incredibly biased editing, which demonised Chinese trainees and invisible edited Japanese trainees at the expense of the heroes, the Koreans. The show was the first major time that global trainees had taken part other than Produce 48. And it was the first time, I believe, that international audiences were allowed to vote, and this, combined with the aftermath of Mnet's rigging scandal, meant that there were lots and lots and lots of people keeping an eye on the show and criticising everything it did. The main example of this so far has come from Dayeon and Chaibing, where Dayeon was excessively angel edited and given an amazing and often incredibly exaggerated storyline, in opposition to Chaibing, who was evil edited and directly compared to Dayeon's amazingness. Yes, I say amazingness because I think this edit was so wacko that it's made me lose brain cells. But it isn't over yet, we've only discussed half of the show after all. In this episode, I discussed the first 6 episodes of the show, starting with the demo stages in episodes 1 and 2, the Connect mission in episodes 2, 3 and 4, the first eliminations in episode 5, and the start of the combination mission in episode 6. The main things to take away from all of this is how intensely Mnet manipulates everything. They chose the outfits, the songs, the groups, and more for the demo stages, and through choosing the performance order, how trainees were styled, and more, they were able to influence whether someone did well or poorly. Another key takeaway is how they put people under stress in hopes of creating bad reactions, a tale as old as time for reality shows around the world. Another thing that is interesting specifically for idol survival shows is the use of the audience and judge reactions, as well as editing like zooms and sound effects to make a performance seem either far better or far worse than it actually was. For instance, through highlighting mistakes, they can make a trainee seem bad, but if they like that trainee, they could instead cut away from their mistakes, film the stage again, or just not have any reactions or highlight of it, which makes it far easier to miss and also makes it seem like less of a problem by proxy. Another key point I want you to take away from this is that Mnet will use all of the forms of the video medium to manipulate you. They can use music, timing, visuals, things like lighting and camera work, sound effects, and more to make trainees seem either better or worse. An example that quickly comes to mind is how both Dayeon and Chinese trainees expressed confidence in themselves in very similar ways. But while Dayeon was given a neutral edit, i.e. the editing didn't do anything special to add much meaning, the Chinese trainees were edited in a negative way to make them seem overly confident, to the point of arrogance a lot of the time. This was done through other trainees looking scared or otherwise shocked, through weird and harsh sound effects and zooms, and sometimes even sinister music. This created a very different tone for sentences which, without editing, were almost exactly the same. This is also an example of how the show demonized Chinese trainees in almost everything they did. Out of all of the storylines we've discussed in this episode where someone in the group was actively letting others down, as opposed to just not being amazing like Urina's storyline, many of them, in fact, I think the majority were Chinese. The only non-Chinese person I can think of who was edited in this way was Dayeon, and Wonjae got the interesting edit there of being the hero, but she was also liked by the producers, so that was expected. Everyone else here was Chinese, and we'll see a lot more evil editing of Chinese trainees in the future. I've also ranted extensively and possibly excessively about both Dayeon and Bahie, both because I hate how they have so many OT8s when neither of them deserve it, and how the show mistreated both of them. Bahie through tying her purely to Kai at the start, and Dayeon through showing her so much favoritism that her actual skills are completely discredited in comparison. It's infuriating. I guess the moral of the story is that as filmmakers or video producers or any creative person in general is told, Mnet's editors, producers and directors will manipulate anything and everything they can, and this has become even more blatant after the rigging scandal. Now that they can't rig with votes, they rig the film to influence the votes as much as they can. I really seriously cannot recommend enough that you go and rewatch at least parts of the show and think about the editing choices that Mnet are making. You can hopefully tell from how long this video is that I have noticed a lot. I think this can teach you a lot about how these shows are run and can make your life much more interesting when watching future seasons. However, beware, I spent all of Island 2 with this level of scrutiny for the editing, and it made it very hard to actually enjoy the show, as well as making it hard to get attached to the trainees, because I just couldn't get invested in either them or the editing, noticing all the different things the editors did. However, that was also probably because the editing of Island 2 was just so insanely blatant and so insanely low quality that it was hard to get invested. I also just didn't find the trainees interesting. Seriously, I thought Girls Planet and to a lesser extent Boys Planet were bad, but Island 2 took it to a whole new level, with insane levels of favoritism baked into the structure of the show itself, to the point that the editing, in the end, really didn't have to do any particularly hard work. There's a saying in film that good editing shouldn't be noticed, like I said at the beginning, but the Island 2 editing was so bad that it was incredibly noticeable. The particular moment that stood out to people so much that even people who normally didn't notice the editing noticed it was the weird editing of Sarang during the Black Maid test, where she was constantly edited with an odd tiger sound and image, which seemed to have no actual purpose. I can't explain in words how wacko some of the edits in Island 2 were. I'm seriously starting to think that Mnet are losing their touch, for girl groups at least. I don't think I'll be able to watch another season of their female survival shows, hence one of the reasons I said I think produce is next to over. But Island 2 is a topic for another day and another video. Wow, this is the first TLDW section I've written that actually kind of serves its function of summarising the content of the episode. Whoops. Well, that's the end of today's episode. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in part 2 for episodes 7 to 12 and the debut of Kepler.